So thanks for the kind introduction. In the run-up to this keynote, I thought about how am I going to make this successful? And I've made two strategic decisions. Number one, who do you think has the most keynotes in the drone industry? Right, so you need to walk a lot on stage. Because if you do that, you get invited to all the keynotes, like Michael Chasen. So I'm going to keep doing that. The other thing I did is I have rehearsed exactly 0 times. Because that's when I'm natural, and that's when I'm at the best of my game. Auterion is a company that has US business, but we come from Switzerland, and you see the drone in the top left. And when you see that video, you know why you're in this industry, because it's just so intuitive, it's native, it's in every living being. Drones are just so cool. Let's do that again. You can't unsee this. And it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, now I can go off stage and you take something home and Mike can share the YouTube link to the video and we've already won, but we have more good stuff. Before that, I need to take you on a small history tour because I can claim a few things that few people in this room can claim. I'm in this industry for 11 years. That's like pretty much since I was 3, if you look at me. And it started really like all the people that started in this industry over a decade ago. You don't do it for a reason. You do it because it's cool, and you think it's cool, and everybody else think you're like a weirdo. So I wanted to do computer vision as my master's, and I wanted to do computer vision on something, not something that drives, but maybe something that flies. And that was the whole point. Do obstacle avoidance, fly indoors, and all the things that are more or less commonplace today. And 3 weeks into the project, they realized, oh, wait, to do computer vision on something that flies, you maybe need an autopilot. But back then, there were no autopilots. You couldn't buy this. This box that we have today, it did not exist. And the MEMS gyroscopes that are commonplace today and will be replaced by laser gyroscopes soon, they were barely existing either. Because phones hadn't been really discovered as a gaming device, so phones didn't have cheap angular rate sensors, so there were no cheap angular rate sensors. And so around 2008, which is around the same time where the smartphone really started to exist, we started to get these sensors. And I forgot to walk, sorry. So around that time, imagine we're here 2008, and now we're going through this, right? We're going to go a bit back and forth. Now, we built one of the first autopilots with MEMS sensors, 2008. And 2009, I had by then put a small student team, 14 people around me. We won the European Microair vehicle competition. Now you might ask yourself, what is a microair vehicle? Well, that was a drone back then because 2009, a drone was a predator. That was a drone. 2009, this stuff with multiple propellers was a microair vehicle because it was a purely academic thing. And we kept doing that, and the software architecture actually looks the same like it looks today. And I made one good strategic call. I decided, well, let's not try to found a company in this early stage. I'm going to stay in academia. I'm going to do my PhD. But because I'm not leveraging anything of the IP that we had built as a student team, let's put it out there. Let's make it available as open source. And as one of the younger open source developers, I decided I don't actually want to prescribe how people are using it, what they do with it, what they have to do. I'll just make it permissively licensed, so under the BSD license. And that was a very strategic decision because I thought, well, probably it's completely useless because we're just a bunch of students. But if it is useful, then it has the best chance to grow into something. And so the first project that was actually adopted was Mavlink in ground control. So that's something super boring, like regulation. Sorry if any regulators are here. It's a communication protocol, and it allows you to talk to the ground station in a defined way. That got picked up first. And then 2010, we started to get adoption for that in a wide fashion, multiple autopilot projects. But the flight control software on the flight controller was really crappy. So we rewrote it a couple times. It was a Pixhawk software, so shorthand PX. And the reason it's called PX4 is just that that's version 4. And that kind of stuck because it actually did work. And then over the years, well, what's the next problem you need to solve when you try to do software to power a widget? Well, you need a widget. And that's Pixhawk, named after the student team from 2008. That was the autopilot where I and a co-conspirator created the whole hardware design. And then 3DR picked that up as a kit to sell. We made that available as open hardware. And that's where it really started to get traction. And there was a big partnership with other open source autopilot communities. And then eventually that led part to be part of the Linux Foundation. That's when you know you've made it, now you're corporate. But it was not enough for one thing, and the problem is with open source, it's hard to use. It's inherently generally hard to use. You need an enterprise version or somebody that's packaging it up for you. And I was sitting there for 1 or 2 years, 2016, 2017, and thinking like, oh, this is not going well for PX4. People complain, it doesn't work, it's too hard, I don't understand it. And nobody did it. So I decided, well, around 2017, it's time. There needs to be an enterprise player, an enterprise solution that takes all this great work and makes it accessible for the industry. And that is exactly what Auterion is doing in a nutshell. Now, going back, this is what we did 2008. That's an open loop takeoff, so controlled crash. And then you see that's vision-based navigation, right? What do you do first? Well, you instrument the environment. So the drone is not actually following the pattern. The pattern is there, so it knows where it is because it knows where each of these markers are. And you can see it's kind of jerky, and it's not super fast, and it's not super pretty. But that thing flew completely autonomously with vision-based navigation 2010. With a bunch of students who didn't know what they're doing, but were dangerous enough because they had the internet. And so now I'm feeling old. And over the years, we started with really 2 contributors, but now it's hundreds. It's hundreds. This is just an excerpt of the contributors we have today. And you can see a lot of random profile pictures on GitHub. I typically find that the hobbyists, they put their picture on there, and then anybody working for a company doesn't care or doesn't want to. And so no profile picture on GitHub is a good indicator that it's a professional. And by the way, there's a word that was formed in our community. It's called I know you from GitHub. Because you meet that profile picture for the first time in real life. And I actually got that reaction today again. And now, well, that's so far cute and nice and great. But here's the problem. As you start to have higher level functionality, computer vision, obstacle avoidance, you start to have more and more stuff on your drone. Each of the things is just a small slice, but if you stack up slices, you're forming an exponential curve. And that is the core reason why it will be really hard for any proprietary entity to keep pace with this development. You need to be having an enormous market share, and there are certain companies in the drone industry that do have an enormous market share, to sustain that. And then you can do it. I'm not discounting that. But if you don't have that market share, If you just have a single-digit percentage market share, you're not going to survive. So this is the only way. And it's a bit like in the smartphone space, right? You have the proprietary integrated solution, and you have the more open solution called Android, and Android is a stack of a ton of open source software. And to do that, you also need increased headcount, as we call it in business. You can measure headcount through the activity, which is the commits, and you can see that that's an exponential curve too. That's the only way to keep up. And it actually shows that this year in Zurich, and we thought like 30 people, you cannot really see it in a picture. 200 people showed up. And because we're a bit unprofessional, we organized it with like 4 weeks notice. 200 people on 4 weeks notice. That shows real demand, and that's real critical mass. And so I think that's a real step change in this industry. And we do cool stuff. We do, for example, tail sitter VTOLs. This video is like 4 or 5 years old, done by one of my students, who is now the lead for VTOL flight control in PX4. That video was before you saw any other VTOL. You just didn't know it existed. That was before Amazon, Wingtra, anybody else. 4 or 5 years ago. I would need to look it up exactly. But you can see it holds position. That was one of the first flights. You also see he's a bit unsure, but it worked. And you can now buy essentially the code base that's driven that video, both as toys as well as $30,000 commercial products. And you know, when you build drones, at some point you're thinking about, okay, I'm building a flight controller. Now, I just hope that everybody understands that that flight controller, the small thing for hobbyists, is not intended to fly people. Because who would do that? That would be completely crazy. And I'm not okay with that, for the record. It's crazy dangerous. We didn't design it for it. But it's working so well that people trust it. And I mean, who would put jet engines on their back? I mean, that's totally crazy too. So this is a jet man who is flying around with jet engine on his back for probably the past 10 years. Crazy guy from Switzerland, you see the analogy. And that's quite successful. And that's not a puppet. That's him balancing, held by the trust of 4 jet engines. And if you ever try this, you know it's impossible. You see the form of the wing? That's PX4. That's PX4 right there stabilizing a human. And I think it's insane, and it's cool, and I absolutely do not recommend to do that. But as you clock up flight hours, as you have breath, as Linus Torvalds says, given enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, you start to get to results that are really incredible. And so what you will start to see probably Jetman doing next, once he's through with his trial period, is go out and fly VTOL so he doesn't have to jump out of a helicopter anymore to take off. Awesome. Don't do it at home. And now you might wonder, okay, they've brought this student turned academic, turned open source developer, turned startup founder. Auterion has now 50 people. We're probably the largest avionics company in our size category by now. Yeah, but what do you do with this stuff? And then you start looking. You start looking and you realize, well, there's this product that's in the market for some time. And then there's that product, completely different looking, that's also running PX4. And then there's this mass market product that's also running PX4. And then there's this monster that's not an RC Cessna there, right? Look at the people on the left. That's also running PX4. And I don't know what Amazon Prime Air is doing these days, but I can say that I had some very deep discussion back in the day with them. So it's probably a question of definition what that thing is running now. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere. People just don't know. But it's driving common standards already. Again, now that VTOL is a bit boring after you've seen Jetman, I apologize. But that's also working. That's a very powerful survey platform. And this commercial drone. So look left and right, and you'll find that everywhere. But as we all know, it's actually not all rosy in our industry. I could have filled multiple slides with this. I just picked the biggest pivots. And I also know I've set myself up for disaster. If anything goes wrong with Jetman or with Auterion, people are going to pull the recording of this. And that's perfectly fine because you need to take risks. But you see, it hasn't all worked out in this industry, but I think that's a good thing because you need to take risk and fail. And I like to explain things in analogies, and so I looked at smartphones and I looked at computers, and it's too similar. It's like confusing. So let's go back 100 years. What is this? So the automotive nerds know it's a Ford Model T. Now what's special about a Ford Model T? It's not the brand, doesn't matter. It's two key things, two key ingredients that show you when an industry is mature. Number one, it has product market fit. If you look at this car, there's nothing about it that you do not have in a modern car as well. It's different. Different wheels, different steering wheel, different suspension, but it has a gasoline engine, well, that had product market fit. It has a steering column. It's all the same parts. That thing is like steady state. That's a car. And the second thing is it's mass manufactured. I'm not sure if Ford was the only or first or whatever person, but that's largely attributed to the success of Ford, and that's what matters, right? Product market fit, mass manufacturing. And it wasn't the first car, it wasn't the last car, but it came around a time where you see a steep decline in the number of manufacturers because up until to that point, people had been manufacturing cars, doing everything, one man, one car, more or less, in a barn, and there were over 5,000 car manufacturers in America. 5,000, that's insane. Now, of course, that didn't work. And so that's what's exactly happening in the drone industry right now. This sort of one man, one woman, one drone manufacturing, all this integration, that doesn't work. We need to specialize. And specialization requires that you can mix and match. How do you mix and match? You mix and match through standards. And it's incredible, but back in the day, you didn't have standardized bolts. They were all bespoke. It took 10 more years until standardization in the whole mechanical industry was a thing. And you can see that with the incorporation dates of two of the largest standardization entities in the world. Now, standardization in software is a lot more complex than standardizing a bolt. And so we're kind of skipping forward. So instead of standardizing on a spec, we're standardizing on, well, let's all use the same code. And that's why open source is the agile approach to standardization. That's really the one takeaway message from this keynote. And that's going to be really important. And you can see it in every software-driven industry. And we see real traction. And this is not a commercial keynote in any way, but Auterion naturally is involved in this. So the Pentagon has adopted open source software for their short-range reconnaissance drone program. It's very real. It's a requirement. Q ground control is a government requirement. And then GE Aviation, big corporate, chose to work with Auterion to build a high-end autopilot based on open source software. So the US government and probably the most well-known US corporate move in the same year. That should tell us something. And that's why I think, and that's the title of my that's the title of my talk, and what I want to conclude with, open source is really enabling the next level of scale in the drone industry. It's what will us all allow to collaborate better, to have less redundancy, and with that, create an open ecosystem that allows smaller players to break the monopoly of vertical integration. Thank you.
As we're walking up here, Tom said that we're going to be increasing in IQ as we go throughout this keynote. That may be debatable, but I can tell you one thing. I have a sneaking suspicion that the comedy level will decrease.
Man, I did not realize how funny Tom was.
He's great.
That was awesome.
He's great. Tough act to follow, and there's two of us. So we're here to talk to you about exactly what you see, real-world examples of significant trends in the commercial drone market. My job is to try and find those trends. Colin and Gwyn Partners actually put out a report not too long ago that sort of paralleled a report I put out several months before that, where I talked about trends, but they actually have real-world examples. Many of you may have seen their report. Many of you probably didn't see my report. Theirs was free. But before we get into these trends and the examples of those trends and what we think will be driving our market forward in the future, I want to kind of go through that market evolution as we see it at Frost & Sullivan, and actually developed this with Colin and his team too. But we start here, and we look at the first steps in this market was really a do-it-yourself market where people were buying parts online and making their own drones. And this says 2010 to 2013. Colin will tell you that was before that because he was actually doing things like that before 2010. It was just a random number. 2013 is more definitive because that's really when the market switched over to from the do-it-yourself and just looking specifically at aerial photography and video. In 2013, we see a big market shift because DJI comes out with really what was the first ready-to-fly camera drone, the DJI Phantom 1. Also, you see some regulatory agencies getting into the mix and saying, look, we have this market coming along. What can we do to support it? That's where 2016 comes in, Part 107. Part 107 really delineates that sea change from not being able to do anything commercially with drones without some kind of 333 exemption and a big approval that needs to be done by the FAA to, hey, a quick test, get your drone going, and you can have a business. Also within 2016 to 2019, we start seeing consolidation because so many people rush into this market because it was billions and billions and billions of dollars to be made, so we got to get in. But not everybody succeeded. 2016 to 2019, all those kinds of things happened, but now where are we standing as we all sit here today? We are starting to see, in fact, if you were in any of the briefings from the FAA, you're starting to see on a global basis performance-based regulations, not just you can do this, you can do that, but show me the performance, we'll let you do what you want commercially. Also, we're seeing, in fact, it was brought up earlier about that Bloomberg article. I promise this was made before that Bloomberg article, but it talks exactly about the same thing, consolidation and accelerating, and VCs saying, okay, we don't want to invest in that stuff anymore because it's not making the money we thought it was going to make. So those are kind of the macro things that are going on now and into the future. We're going to talk more about some micro things. So I am going to talk about real quick each of the trends that we're seeing. That's more of a micro trend. And then Colin's going to give you some real world examples that they've seen when they were developing their report. So the first one is we are really seeing real revenue being achieved by commercial programs, both internal and external. That ROI is being achieved in the field. And so Colin, tell us a couple of examples of that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, thank you guys for having us here. It's an honor, and it's been incredible to watch this industry grow over the last 10 or 12 years into what it is, and never has it been, especially since we did this report, never has it been so evident to me that, the next 10 years is going to be really, really exciting, not just for our flying autonomous robotics, but for autonomy and robotics and value creation in general. So really excited to be here. Also, is Rob Miso in the room? All right, I have his phone. He left it at the security counter. Anyways, we'll find him later. And it may start ringing in my bag because he's been pinging it. Okay, cool. So yeah, we did this report. We've tried to do a report each year that kind of says, hey, this is what we're seeing in the industry. This is what's going on. At Gwin Partners, we kind of sit between the market, people that are adopting drones and trying to figure out how to bring drones into their operations, many of which are global and have, kind of operations across many geographies. And then the companies that are innovating and inventing new technology and finding new ways to generate value. And we kind of sit between those two, and we help translate those stories and those narratives into really clear, understandable value propositions. And we try to, kind of open up revenue lines for our clients that are developing these incredible technologies. And at the same time, we help industry figure out what technologies to adopt so that they can see real ROI. And so in this year's drone report, we really wanted to focus on, hey, let's talk to all of these customers that we've been selling drones to and drone services to for the last 12 years. And let's just have some conversations about what are you guys seeing in the drone space? What got you into using drones? Usually we're talking to the person that runs the drone program or the UAS program at whatever company. And we just kind of wanted to get their stories of like, how long has this taken? I think what I've noticed in the last, 10 years or whatever is or especially in the last few years, is that we as an industry, we can all get together at these industry conferences and we can, drink the Kool-Aid and we can talk about how awesome our technology is. And we kind of have this whole conversation going. And then what we realize when we talk to customers that are making the buying decisions of these Fortune 500 companies, they're not really paying attention to our narrative. They're just looking for solutions to do things better, faster, cheaper, safer, more reliably, et cetera. And so it's like two completely separate narratives going on. And, I think, the good part of that is that it doesn't really matter what's happening in our narrative over here. They're looking for solutions. And the bottom line is drones and the amount of wattage that they use to generate incredibly insightful information is just a killer value prop that's not going anywhere. And they all know that. And so we can talk about whatever we want, but they are going to adopt this technology from us or someone else because it just makes sense. And so that's one of the things we really noticed in talking to all of these different program owners at these different companies. So I have just a couple of different excerpts from the report, which is free. We just want to be able to, again, the tenet that we have at our company is just provide value. Whether we're getting on a couple of hour phone call with a young startup that wants some advice of how to engage with the market, whether we're talking to, most of whom are not clients of ours, we just want to provide value because our whole goal is to increase the rate of adoption of this technology into industry. But what we've seen in this latest report, which is really interesting, is a bunch of examples of hard ROI. And there's so many examples of, we did this thing, it saved us $250,000. We were able to use these drone images to go back to subcontractors and work through, hey, were those trenches actually dug in the first place? Turns out they weren't correctly. Okay, miscommunication, we actually don't have to pay you an extra $250,000. You just need to build the trenches that you never built. And there's just so many examples of these, with AES. energy and their partnership with Measure to bring Measure and to help them learn how to fly drones, train their pilots, figure out what types of drones to use. Azel here has been with AES and running their drone program since like 2016, since it was like a science project basically. There's many examples of that where there was kind of a champion of this technology, and it's a multi-year process to go from, hey, and you'll see in a couple slides, people that are like buying the very first Phantom 1 and figuring out how to just get like construction site monitoring. That process takes a while. But what is really promising is that I have yet to talk to a single company or a single one of these programs, literally not one ever, that says, yeah, we thought drones were going to be valuable and we thought there may be something there, so we bought some drones and we put them to work and we collected some data and it turns out they weren't valuable. I mean, we have not heard that one time. Every single company we talk to says, yeah, it's obvious. We can literally spend 2 pennies on electricity and I get this map. So yeah, that's super valuable. And we're going to be using that across all of our geographies around the world. It's going to take some time. And so I think, it's easy for us on this side of the fence to see how possible it is, how easy it is to create this value and want it to just happen instantaneously. And so, yeah, I totally agree with Tom and the fact that, this is going to take a little longer than VCs might like in terms of getting their immediate returns and things like that. And we just have to navigate those waters. But, as you'll see, if you download the report and take a look, we interview companies across industry, and it's all very positive feedback that we're getting from real customers and real companies. But these are a couple examples of that. So they are actually seeing real ROI. That is the first trend. That's good news.
Yeah, so with companies actually seeing some ROI, and now the next step is how do we scale? Not only how do we scale in order to meet requirements in many areas, but how do we scale up within one area to include a large drone fleet? And Colin also has some examples of that.
Yeah, and we'll keep this one really quick. It's kind of a follow-on on the last one. So cool, we did the science project, we got this program going, we bought 1 drone, then we bought 10 drones, then we hired a few pilots. Now, the next, big kind of trend that we saw in doing this report is that time and time again, these companies, and like I said, it takes 2 to 3 years in these big, slow-moving, large organizations with the regulatory environment, changing technology, et cetera, but they're all starting to really grow from a handful of people testing and figuring out if there's ROI to, okay, we've established there is ROI, now let's scale this program. And again, a couple of examples here, but even the one from AES on a couple of slides ago, she was telling us that I think last year they had 60-something pilots. This year they have 175 internal pilots at AES. We're seeing that at Telstra in Australia. They've got, I think, over 100 pilots now. I remember taking solos out there a few years ago and kind of just showing them what a drone could do to inspect a cell phone tower. And now they have over 100 of their own internal pilots, traveling around with drones all day, every day, shooting and keeping people on the ground, or at least figuring out what side of the tower to go up. And so, again, we'll keep this slide quick, but it's essentially these programs internally are going from 1 or 2 drones to 10 drones to 50 drones to hundreds of drones. And, at the same time, there's this new wave of people that are now evaluating the tech for the first time. We're seeing the programs that are being scaled are the programs that really were leading edge because there happened to be somebody in the company 3-4 years ago that saw that these things were coming and that drones were really cool, and maybe they had a Phantom personally, and they were like, hey, we could pop this little drone up and look at the cell phone tower right here. We could inspect the ice bridge or check these transducers, whatever it might be. They were able to use those, and kind of get the company going at a really early stage. Those are the companies that we're seeing really scale, but those were really the very first adopters. But we are seeing that, and that's another big trend.
So automation, we are seeing, we're slowly getting to the point where people are thinking about beyond visual line of sight, people are thinking about flight over people from a regulatory perspective. Industry is much further ahead. We're seeing lots of development and automation, drone in a box, anything that can make things automatic and happen without a pilot in the actual area visually watching these things operate. So Colin actually has some real world examples of those things occurring as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, these things are flying robots, and as soon as robots are useful, we don't call them robots anymore. We call them a vacuum cleaner, or we call them a drone, or a vehicle. And we see that with drones. And right now, there's such incredible value that can be created with these things that you can have a human in the loop getting paid a lot of money to operate an autonomous robot and still create great returns. But where we are headed, and once regulations, which I agree with Tom, we don't have to wait for regulation. There's a massive industry waiting for us to just generate and deliver value in a repeatable, reliable, safe fashion. But as we're able to start utilizing these autonomous robots as autonomous robots, then the cost of generating that data and generating that intelligence becomes the value proposition is really just becomes ridiculous. And that's going to be over the next few years. But we'll see that everywhere from on the mainstream. What Sunflower Labs has done, I don't know if you know those guys, are out of Switzerland. Really interesting model where they're kind of creating this drone-in-a-box solution for homes and for home security. And I don't know how many of you, put it this way, how many of you have not had a friend show you over the last few years, hey, check out my Nest Cam. I can log into my house and see the front door, or I can see the living room, whatever. Like that's just a fun thing that people like to show off. It especially was really popular a few years ago. Well, I think that's just the next version of that is like, check it out. I can pop up and I can monitor my yard from anywhere. And they're using these really cool vibration sensors in the ground, and they're doing all these AI analytics on a TX2 processor in the little drone station to figure out what kind of movement's happening. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the mainstream and the lower cost, and then industrial applications that are more niche in nature with Percepto and Robotics. They're doing kind of ISR and surveillance applications with EOIR. And then American Robotics is another really cool one. They came out of Carnegie Mellon. They're doing kind of autonomous drone stations for agriculture with multispectral sensors. And they're building the solution very specific to agriculture, where they don't have great wireless data, and they don't even have good LTE, so they have a kind of a GPU-enabled edge server at the base station that processes the gigabytes and gigabytes worth of data and turns it into a 50 megabyte base map that can be uploaded over LTE. And so these custom solutions are being developed, and I think I don't know if that's a trend or not that we have in our deck, but the fact that drones are getting more and more specific for specific applications, they're becoming less and less one size fits all, especially as people are able to fly them for longer and farther away and collect really specific types of data. We're actually going to be seeing a much wider array of sizes and shapes of drones as people are able to utilize them more and for longer.
Yeah, we only had time for 5 trends, so that would be 6.
Okay.
And
that was a bonus trend.
And the examples Colin gives here are just a few. There's probably 30 to 40 companies out there that are drone-in-a-box companies. So what happens if, for instance, we might have a trade war and we can't get Chinese drones? We don't have any base, industrial base right now that can scale and build small drones for commercial or even military use right now. So if the government went to someone and said, we need 500 drones made for us right now, we can't do it. So there's increasing support in that area to build things here in the US and have that industrial base capability. And Colin has examples of that as well.
Yeah, first of all, on that last slide, FLIR, anybody from FLIR, can I please have a Hornet? I'll make a really cool video about it. That is just the coolest little helicopter. I mean, come on. But no, I think it's hard not to mention, especially with what we're seeing in the news cycles over the last 6 months, that the U.S. government has made it very clear that, and there was a video we put out on LinkedIn about this recently, but essentially the long and short of it is that the U.S. government has designated drones as critical to our national defense and our kind of military industrial complex. And by giving it that designation, it means that drones and drone technology is now eligible for all different kinds of not just subsidy, but acceleration, non-dilutive R&D money, NRE. It's basically the U.S. government making it clear that we want a lot of this technology being innovated and developed here. And so there's a number of companies, Teal, Skydio, Vantage, Luminaire, Altavian, as well as Parrot, which is in France. But that are all part of the short range reconnaissance DIU program, where they're getting up to a couple of few $1 million each to try and develop a platoon level drone. But we're going to be seeing a lot more programs like this out of AFWorks, out of DIU, out of Army Futures Command, and that's something that is definitely a big trend that's happening right now.
All right, our last trend, and again, this is industry preparing for the advancement of rules that allow us to do more with drones and then extended flight time. There are many examples of this. It's not just hybrid, it's also the hydrogen power, like you'll see from Ballard on the show floor. But and Colin has worked with companies in this very specifically, and I'll let him talk about that as well.
Yeah, so again, as the point of a drone becomes collecting data so that we can analyze that data and draw insights from that data, the longer you can stay up there, the more data that can be collected in an individual single flight, the more efficiency can be gained. And so that image on the last slide, I took that with my phone last week in South Africa with Alti, who's actually the guy that founded Steady Drone, Duran. And a lot of you guys know from years in the past, Steady Drone made some great little kind of consumer GoPro quadcopters. They went underground. They've been working on these long endurance VTOLs. And the numbers that they're getting are really pretty staggering. They're little 20-pound, 6-foot wingspan drones flying for like 6 hours. And then they have their mid-size is still an SUAS. It's like 40 pounds. It flies for like 12 hours. And then they have a big one that's like 180 pounds. I can't remember the wingspan, but the thing is massive. And it's flying for 30 hours. So they've got these really long endurance drones. And I think that's something that, and those are runway, what's it called when you don't need a runway? One of those things. Runway independent, runway, whatever. So you don't need a runway. It's a VTOL, which is sweet. And it flies for anywhere from 6 to 30 hours. Another really cool development is Doosan, who is a very large energy company in South Korea, came to us a couple years ago and said, hey, we want to take our hydrogen fuel cell stack, these little 1,000-watt stacks, and create a drone that can fly with them. And so, we just had this come out recently, but now you have a drone that's a SUAS, so falls under 55 pounds, and it flies on compressed hydrogen gas, and it'll fly for 2 to 3 hours. And it's really, really quiet. It's a low vibration environment, just like electric. You're not having to mess with carburetors or maintain an internal combustion engine. And they're building out this whole network where they're taking and delivering hydrogen tanks to all their industrial clients. And this is a company that owns Bobcat, and they own Doosan Heavy Equipment. They sell big tractors. So they're really seeing these things as being used as industrial equipment that is going to be used day in and day out, and that's how they're developing this. And so that's and of course what Spencer's doing in Impossible Aerospace, Top Flight, we've got a bunch of companies out there that are developing these really innovative long endurance drones, and that's something that I think we're going to see, again, more and more of over the next couple of years.
All right, we're a minute over, so Colin, close us out quick.
And that's the conclusion. Yeah, so we're transitioning from being managed by drone enthusiasts to being managed by subject matter experts. So we're like Tom said, instead of drone people trying to create a business, it's business people trying to create an industry. We will continue to experience slow, steady growth. I think at some point, the growth is going to, there's going to be a tipping point like we saw in the consumer drone space when we launched the Phantom 1, because there was no barrier to delivering the demand that existed. And that'll happen, when the time is right from a regulatory perspective. And then advances in technology will drive growth by reducing the amount of time it takes to turn data into decisions. So that's, a kind of a nod to, we talk about autonomy a lot, but one word that I'll leave you with that we see time and time again from the market is workflow. What is the overall total workflow of operating this flying robot and turning it into valuable data? And a big part of that is that you're utilizing autonomy throughout the process. But even if you have a fully autonomous system, there's still a workflow involved with getting that thing to the site, building the initial mission, doing all of that. So how easy is that workflow? How repeatable is it? And how easy is it to train a non-drone professional to do that workflow? But yeah, that's it. We're only 2 minutes over.
That's all.
Not bad.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Hand it off.
let's start again. So again, Mike Sobola, and I'm his lovely assistant.
Yeah, right.
And I'm a private pilot, and I've been in the video business for about 30 years. I started in 1983, and I do a lot of Adobe training, so, you know, and then flying the plane and being a video editor and a video producer actually got me into drones. So I started flying drones about 5 years ago, and about a year or so ago, I started working with Mike. And very recently, we opened Mid-Atlantic Drones, but we've been doing this for a long time. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, Mike Sobola?
Yeah, I'm also a private pilot. It's kind of how I got into it. When you first started, there was no 107. As most people know, it was a 333. You had to be a pilot. It just kind of was a natural fit. Enjoy it, but we've been doing this. We're doing a lot of construction mapping, do a lot of cinematography, and of course the construction mapping is kind of what brought us here today. So again, cinematography and construction mapping, we do some inspections. We're starting to get into the underwater space as well. But again, today it's all about construction mapping. So let's talk about industry applications. Industry applications, a lot of stuff you can do with what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give we're going to give a broad overview, and then we're going to drill down towards the end. We're going to talk about you know, how we get jobs, how you can, you know, how do you get into the construction business? How do you break in? How do you reach these guys and these women who are very, very busy, who, you know, who just want to do what they want to do? We'll talk about that towards the end, but our focus in the beginning is going to be just an overview of the process and what you need and how to get going with construction mapping or any other kind of mapping. So a lot of things you can do. You can do a 2D map or an ortho, location, measurements, you talk about volume and area. The most useful tool that overall that we use is the ortho map, where they can go in and just see every week. For the most part, most of our jobs are weekly, but they can go in and see what their site looks like from above, and they can drill down to a high resolution map on that. We also do some 3D stuff. We'll do 3D models using the same techniques with some different flight plans, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And we'll give them a 3D model, and for the most part, it's not absolute. It's relative accuracy. We don't use a whole lot of ground control points. On some occasions, we do, but for the most part, we're just using the data generated by the drone and the satellites to produce those 3D models. Some other stuff we've done some plant health and agricultural stuff, which is uses basically the same techniques. And of course, height maps and contours and those kind of things. We've done some urban planning stuff. We've worked with cities and companies, pre-visualizations and things, just to get an idea, a better overview without using an airplane. And again, this uses some of the same tools, the ortho maps, things such as that nature. But the biggest one is, for the most part, for our business, is construction. We're not doing cinematography. Construction. 32%, and this is, of course, I think from 2 years ago, but 32% of all drone usage is in construction-related disciplines. So, you know, we're from the DC area. A lot of people want to do cinematography. We really want to get into cinematography. They think this is the thing to do. Well, that's fine, but it's cinematography is really stressful. You got a director who's got a vision. You got to fly it exactly like he wants it. You may need specialized cameras and equipment because they think it's a better sensor or they think they want a better picture. Construction in our experience, you make a little bit more money. You can have longer contracts, so you can count on the cash flow. So that's kind of where we have tried to really specialize, along with restricted airspace, which we'll go into a little bit later on. Since we're in the DC area, we do a lot of stuff in the freeze, the flight restricted zone. But it all boils down to construction and using it that way. Some of the really cool things you can do with this is an overlay of an early project I did in Manassas for a construction company. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look, the black lines, The black lines on
Is the middle
screen-
button.
Yeah.
There you go.
The black lines here, you can see some of the actual blueprints overlaid. So, and some of this other ghosting stuff. It's hard to see on the PowerPoint thing, but basically, then this was done through the drone deploy overlay method, where you bring in the plans, the blueprint plans that the construction company and the super gives you, and you overlay it onto your ortho map, and they're able to look and see where it's lined up, and if they have any problems with that. For the most part, you probably want to fly this kind of thing using ground control points, using higher accuracy methods. But for this one, we didn't. They just wanted to get a general overview as to how they were lining up, were there any major problems, and it was pretty much good enough for what they wanted to do. Other thing that we've flown are contours. So again, this is a drone deploy. We did put down ground controls for this one. They wanted to actually get a volume on this pile here. So we put ground control points at the base here, in the middle, on the sides, and on the other end here, and then flew the site, concentrating mainly. I mean, this is what we wanted to get, but we were able to fly at a height which actually got us most of the site. We gave them DSM files, which they converted in their construction software into this actual contour map. And Drone Deploy, I don't know if you're familiar with the contours. Drone Deploy does a digital surface modeling, so it includes terrain as well as structures. If you have other types of software, you can output digital terrain models, DTMs, and files, which will eliminate basically the structures and any kind of trees and things that you don't want in your surface map. But this was good enough for what they were doing.
Right, so actually I was going to add one thing. If you guys need to do volumetric, it's very important that you put ground control points at the bottom and at the top of whatever you're measuring. That's very, very important for the map, the actual measuring of the volumes, to be more accurate. And they don't have to be geotagged or anything. You can just put a marker, something that you will recognize later on when you're doing the mapping, and you can just tag it.
This is a 3D model that we did. For my client, I just started doing the 3D models through Drone Deploy. We didn't do anything special. We didn't do anything.
Go ahead and click.
Did not lay any ground control for this. We simply flew the mission. How we do is we'll fly the ortho. We'll fly a Drone Deploy structure. With Drone Deploy, you can do structure, you can do terrain. Structure is for smaller things. And it gives you, basically, it flies the nadir position with the camera straight down. And then it also flies an orbit and selected points with the camera at a oblique angle. So you get different angles, and you get the parallax and the stereo views that you need for the actual 3D model. And then we go back and we actually manually take photos at different levels, taking into account shadows, any specific features that we think we may want to highlight. And we focus on those areas, and we'll fly at different oblique angles, at different altitudes, and different distances from the building, just to get different views. And we'll process all that. And then, as you can see, I mean, this is a pretty good map, pretty good model for basically not that much work. It takes a little more time on the ground, of course, taking all the extra photos and things, but it gives them an insight that they like. It's not accurate. We didn't lay ground control points, but you can do that. And we'll go into that a little bit later on how you can basically make it more of an accurate map relatively easily for the most part. Oh, here it is here now. These are ground control points I like to use. We use pretty much anything, but this is a piece of plywood picked up, and I marked myself. Very easy to see from 300-400 feet up. I mean, and you know exactly where to put your locator. So we don't use them a lot, and this goes into managing client expectations and knowing what your client wants, what their deliverables are. A lot of times they don't really know. You don't want to overfly your site, or you don't want to overprocess, or you don't want to do too much work. You want to know what's the minimum amount of work you can do to get what you need. And a lot of times it's not ground control points, but if you do use ground control points, there are a number of ways to do it. This is how I started out. I still have these, so I use them. Of course, the guys in the expo room, they've got their fold-up ones, which are pretty good and pretty lightweight. Because the problem, these are pretty heavy. But you can. The point is, you need something that you can see from the air, and you can pinpoint this point right here. In the past, it's been very difficult, very expensive to do that, especially on construction sites. You'd either have to bring their guy in, have him locate the points, because you put the points down. If you're not familiar with the process, you put the points down, then you have to locate them using a GPS receiver, which basically tells you where they are on Earth. And then you input that in your software once you fly them, and it makes it an absolute reference to basically anywhere on Earth where you are. So this is
that's the MLID, the MLID Reach.
MLID Reach. This is relatively new in the last couple of years. It's about $1,500 for a unit that to get this kind of technology to be able to look at your points, you would be spending $10,000, $15,000, or bringing in a surveyor who would do it and charge your client or charge you a tremendous amount of money by the hour. Now you can do it yourself. You put an app on your cell phone or your iPad. Fits on here. You put the pole in the middle of the ground control points right there, and that's your point. And you basically locate those points using this. It gives you an absolute GPS position, which you can then lock your map down to, or your model down to, and be able to make measurements and take measurements and have an accurate.
Right. So if I may interject just for a little bit, so there's two ways that you can do measuring for mapping and construction. There's absolute and there's relative. So like everything, relative would be, hey, where's that restaurant? Oh, from my house, 2 doors down, relative to where you are. But absolute, you would give an address. Oh, it's on M Street, number, 47 in Washington, D.C., whatever it is, right? So for some deliverables, they need the absolute. So that's when you need the MLID Reach. That's when you need to actually have absolute GPS coordinates that then you put into Pix4D, Drone Deploy, or Zephyr, or whatever app you're using, right? But you don't necessarily need that when they only need relative measurements. So it doesn't matter where on Earth it is. From here to here, you have 30 feet, or whatever it is. And then you can actually tag those as manual tie points if you're using Pix4D, or you can just tag one of them in Drone Deploy and then give get the relative measurements. So depending on what your deliverable is, you are perfectly fine with a spray bottle and spray paint bottle and a can and just mark an X on the ground, or one of those. Or you actually need an RTK drone and then your ground control points with absolute measurement.
Right. And you can use the ground control points again too to do the relative, to be able to scale your models and things by tagging that, entering in manual tie points into your software and stuff. We're not really going to go into that, but it's all relatively easy to do. If you're using ground control points, you want to space them evenly. This is our experience. 50-acre site, you can use 5 points. These are not spaced 50 on a 50-acre site. This is a pretty small site, but for illustration purposes, this is kind of how you want to space them. You want to have them on the edge, and you want to have them in the middle. So you want to be able to see these in multiple pictures, to be able to tag them in multiple pictures. And you want to be able to, as you can see from there, this is, of course, Photoshop, but it's very clear where the middle of that is, because after you fly the mission, you actually have to go in and tag these points and put in the coordinates, the satellite coordinates of the middle of that picture. So you zoom in, you find the absolute middle, you tag it, and it it basically tells you where it is. And
Right.
that's how the software tells, what the scale is, where it is on Earth and everything, and puts your model or your ortho up to where it needs to be. Briefly, there's two main steps for mapping, for those of you who haven't done it before. Of course, data, image, and acquisition, and stitching, the actual putting the images together. And part of that is gathering quality data. And what goes into that? Altitude, overlap, flight speed, shutter speed, sensor size, and time of day. These are some of the important elements. And by the way, we'll make this available if you want to, at the end, if you want to send us an email, we'll send you the presentation. There's all the information that you need. So don't worry about trying to write it down if you're trying to do that. If you take pictures, we'll make the presentation available. So these are the major items that we found are essential for mapping. Altitude, of course, the higher you go, the easier it is for the software to stitch your images together because it has multiple points on the image to find, because it's actually using specific points on the image visually, as software does, and says, oh, these three images are the same in these pictures, so we can line them up on those points. So the higher you have, the higher you fly, the more points you have. However, the higher you fly, the lower your resolution of your map. So you want to kind of find a sweet spot somewhere in there to be able to fly low enough to get the points you need where you're still getting the resolution that you need in your image. And of course, the lower you fly, the slower you have to go, because you want clear images and you want that overlap. So the longer it takes. So there are a lot of factors that go into that. And part of that is also overlap. You want, just depending on what you're flying, if there are a lot of features in there, you can do less overlap. The more overlap you have, the more successful your map will be, the matching and the stitching will be. If you're doing things like any image with not a lot of features in it, you want more overlap. These images have a lot of features in them. As you can see, there's a lot of points in here that the software says, oh, I know that, I can see that. A lot of different things that make, that it can match in here. Whereas if you had just a wheat field or something, it'd be very difficult for it to match, and you want to fly lower and slower and with a lot more overlap. And of course, flutter speed. Flutter speed is important too, but I don't know what that is. Flight speed and shutter speed. The faster you go, the lower you go, the slower you have to go, just because of you need to take more images, covering more ground. So you want as high a shutter speed as possible to get clear images as well. So.
Right. So let me just add one thing here, and it seems counterintuitive because it's absolutely true that the higher that you fly, the less resolution you have in the pictures, because if you're 400 feet, you're capturing a great more deal of land than you are if you're flying at 100 feet. But believe it or not, for some construction sites, you actually get more accuracy by flying higher. So don't immediately dismiss the flying higher as in, oh, no, lower is better. Not always. It depends on what you need to measure and how many details there are on that construction site.
And also you should keep in mind that as you fly over buildings, if you're flying over a site with a building and a flat ground, where the building's at 100 feet, 150 feet, whatever, when you fly over that building, all of a sudden your ground speed has, or your overlap has decreased dramatically, because when you're, all of a sudden you're not that high anymore over where your ground is at that point. So you'll have problems matching then too. So you have to take that into consideration as well. It just all depends on what your final deliverable is and what you're trying to accomplish and what your client wants. What do you need? Well, you need a drone with geotagging capabilities and the largest sensor possible. Most drones these days have geotagging capabilities. If they're any kind of a somewhat professional drone. And the sensor basically allows you to get more information as you're flying, of course. It basically, the larger the sensor, the more light, the more pixels, the more information. That's pretty much it. How many photosensitive sites there are on your sensor. The other thing that a lot of people have problems with, a mechanical versus a rolling shutter. And the easiest way to really describe this is that a rolling shutter takes in rows of pixels. So it's going from top to bottom, for instance, whereas a mechanical shutter, it off or on. So you have the entire image being taken at once, whereas instead of just rows from top to bottom. If that makes any sense. It's not exactly a curtain or a shutter that opens and closes,
Right.
but it effectively acts that way. Because
So you guys already know that the drone doesn't stop to take the picture. It keeps on moving. So if you have something that is, even though it's really fast, but it's doing it line by line, whether it's from bottom to top or top to bottom, it doesn't matter. By the time it gets to the bottom or to the top, the drone already moved. And that introduces distortion in your images. Therefore, it's introducing inaccurate measurements. That's why the Phantom 4 Pro was so desired by people like us that did construction mapping and any kind of orthomosaic, because it was the only one in that price range that had a mechanical shutter. And I'm sure you know, if you have a Phantom 4 Pro, that you actually need to turn it on. It's not on by default. You actually need to go in the settings and turn it on.
Here's an example. This is, I think, a DJI photo, so you've probably seen a lot of this if you looked at the mechanical versus rolling shutters. But it's evident in the light post, I guess, is the biggest thing. See how it kind of bends backwards, whereas here it's not? That's because as you're rolling along, as you mentioned, you're getting different parts of the image because your drone's moving. So it causes distortion. It causes things to kind of bend. And other things are like propellers, of course, are a good example.
Right.
It looks like the propellers are bent and things. But if you're not comparing it to another photograph, this looks pretty good. But if you're doing mapping, you're doing any kind of orthos or things, it's a bad thing. It'll cause distortions. It'll cause problems with your stitching. And of course, your accuracy in your map. Time of day. The best time of day, for the most part, for flying orthos and 3D models, is the middle of the day because the sun is pretty even. If you're doing cinematography, you want morning light, you want evening light for the most part because you've got the sun hitting it just right. You've got the things you want. But we're not doing cinematography here. We're collecting data. So the best way to get that data and to get those images for our data is to do it where the light is even and straight up and down. Because when you have shadows, your drone is not going to account for those. It's going to be, a lot of times it'll be hard, the shadows are moving, and it just causes uncertainty in some of the software. Software is getting better and better every day, but for the most part, if you can, flat light, middle of the day is the best time to do it. Just what we've seen. Some of the things that happens for various reasons, ragged wall edges and lines. This is something I did in a building I was flying for like 18 months from conception all the way up to completion. And if you look here, we have these, this is after the stitching. This is what the ortho came out with on the very first pass. And part of the problem was that we had this guy down here loading some stuff while we were moving. So he's loading stuff onto the roof. So he's basically disrupting this. So your images, whenever you have, the best scenario is to fly over a site that is not, that nobody's working on, which is totally ludicrous because you never have a construction site, for the most part, where nobody's working on, at least in my experience. So what happens is you have these little things come along that disrupt your image, and these are some of the problems that happen. The wall is just kind of caved in here. The air conditioner units are kind of weird because of these are actually from reflections. But Sometimes you can't avoid that. In this case, I was able to go back and reprocess it. I didn't have to refly it. I just kind of went through and processed a couple times, and I got lucky, and it cleaned up enough to where, I was able to deliver it. The client, I knew what my client wanted. This is the case where you know what, they're not looking at the roof. They're not looking at that part of the roof. It's not part of what they want to see. It's not a critical element. So I was able to say, hey, this is what happened, and they're fine with that. So you just have to know what your client wants, what's acceptable. Another case, maybe that's what they're looking at. They want to know, do they have a straight roof line? And in which case you have to examine how you're flying it and what you are delivering. But in this case, it was fine. Roof movement. Same thing over here. We had roof movement on this side. The arrow's kind of misplaced here. That's why it's over here. If you see this right here, same thing. There was something going on over here. The guy's working on the roof, and it just caused kind of a cave-in on my image. On these things, I'm sorry. This is off a little bit, but again, we were talking about this here. The melting look of the air conditioning units was actually due to the reflections. If you have highly reflective areas in your shooting and flying area, what you're taking images of, this can happen. It causes really weird things with the software, with the stitching. And again, you have to take that into account. Either fly different angles and things, or fly slower, or try and get different looks at it so you can minimize that. A lot of times there's not a whole lot you can do with it. So if, for instance, they wanted that, say they wanted just to see how their roof units were doing, well, I may fly this particular thing at a different point of day, and I may just concentrate on this area and give them just this as a separate ortho. Or I may reprocess this part as a separate ortho. It just depends on what they want and what's acceptable to your client.
Right, so let me just add one thing here. If you're flying a large enough construction site and you're flying really low and it's going to take you 3 batteries to fly, well, 3 batteries is going to be over an hour, right? The shadows change because the sun keeps on moving. Well, rather the earth moves, but still. And it might be better off for you to fly higher so you can actually fly the construction site faster, so the shadows don't move as much, or do it in sections. Pix4D, for example, lets you merge projects. So you can do a third, then another third, then another third, rather than all of it and then change the batteries. Now what I'm saying? So that will actually help with the accuracy of your measurements and avoiding these kind of things.
And and the shadows, the different looks. A lot of times you'll say, "Oh, you don't want shadows in your photos or stitching together different times a day." For the most part, for construction and things, as long as it's not the progress of the site isn't affected. So, like you fly it one day and you fly it another day, which would be totally acceptable. If it's just moving shadows or different light, it's okay. You'll see that, but it usually doesn't matter. It's not we're not doing cinematography. We're doing data gathering. We're doing that kind of thing. So, again, how do you do that? You shoot at a time of day without long, harsh shadows. Redo it. Do it faster. If you're doing 3D models, shoot at different heights, different angles, which we do as a matter of fact now.
And by the way, I do those manually. I go in orbit around the building, and I'm doing manual shots of all of those things, different heights, different angles. What gives you the good 3D model is actually the parallax. So that's what you want. That's what you really want.
So what do you need to accomplish your task? Well, as we said before, you need a drone with geo-tagging capabilities that allows it to put in where it is. You need mapping software, pretty obvious. Most mapping software is free, or a lot of it's free. It's the processing that actually...
the acquisition is usually free.
Yeah,
right.
So, you can fly your favorite software and then figure out which one you like to process it on, and you can process the images anywhere. Same thing as if for instance, you have data that you did, maybe last month, and you've changed providers, you can go back and reprocess stuff. So they're 2 different things. Here's some of the ones, just a few of the ones. Drone deploy, I just saw Pix4D. We have been using Drone Deploy for quite a long time. We're going to be switching to Pix4D soon. We're Pix4D certified. We've done a lot of that.
Right.
It's just that we started with Drone Deploy. We were most comfortable with that. And we've been experimenting with Pix4D. We've been doing a lot more models, 3D modeling and things. And Pix4D is just a little bit better, well, a lot better at that. You can do a whole lot more with it. Drone Deploy is kind of catching
it
up.
allows for a lot more user input, Pix4D, than Drone Deploy does. So.
And we don't get paid by Pix4D. So.
No, we don't.
So how does it work briefly? We kind of went through this, but your drone takes pictures, straight down or predetermined altitude, spacing, and time. You could program it ahead of time, and it flies what you programmed. And then you load for processing. You can either do it on the cloud, which Drone Deploy does. Pix4D allows you to do both. We prefer to do the localized processing. It's a lot faster, and your data's right there. So you can, and because it's limited only by your processing speed and your computer power. So
yeah, a good video card. So Pix4D uses CUDA. I don't know if you guys are familiar with CUDA. So that's an NVIDIA card thing. So if you have a really good NVIDIA card, your processing will be that much faster than the cloud anyway.
Typical workflow is you decide what the area you want to cover, which is more than likely determined by your client. You can lay ground control points based on your needs, whether you do or not, based on what your final deliverable is. You create and upload the flight plan. Of course, almost always done beforehand. Sometimes it's difficult to do it beforehand because if your client doesn't give you a KML file to input it, you're usually dealing with a site that is it's hard to define a lot of times if you don't have a file to start with already, because any of the images that exist and the maps that exist that you may be doing your grid from are not accurate because, well, they probably have trees on them and now you have clear ground, so it's hard to tell where your actual site is. So you may have to fly it and then refly it, readjust, fly a test flight, readjust, and then figure out what your parameters are. But in any case, you want to do that ahead of time if you can. Fly the drone, geotag the ground control points. Well, actually, that's out of order. You'll have to geotag them first, then geotag them in the software. Transfer the data, process the data, and then manage and share and collaborate, which is, depending on your software, either easier or your provider.
Right.
Either easy to do or very difficult to do.
Yeah, some of the ground control points will give you an XML file, and that most of the processing software will take. And all you need to do is tag one, and then the rest of them will be tagged automatically. But if you have to tag one by one manually, that's a lot of little numbers that you got to type. So, I prefer the XML.
This is a screen grab of Drone Deploy. If anybody's ever used that, it looks pretty familiar. Some of the information on there and what you create. Your area, your intent, your battery, and it tells you your batteries, how many batteries you need. You can put your height in. There's a lot of other considerations. But once you actually put your grid in, you can adjust all these. So when you adjust your altitude, it'll tell you how many batteries and what your flight time is based on your overlap. And then you can adjust all that, but it's all interconnected. For the most part, you're flying a grid. This is what it looks like. And as you go along, if you've never done this, never seen this, you'll actually have a little airplane or a little thing that goes along, and you can watch it do that as it does it. If you have Drone Deploy has something called Live View. If you have that enabled, it'll actually do a low resolution map as you're going along. Build it on your screen as you go along. And then after you're done and upload the images, it'll replace that with high resolution images. It's really good for if you're in the field, they want to see it right away, they can see where they are and they can look at the potential problems like almost instantly. It's pretty cool. But it's not always accurate. Some of the problems you have with the stitching also throws the map out of whack sometimes. So you get kind of funky maps where where whole parts of the map are shifted over. So depending on your site, it could or it couldn't be a good day. I don't really use that just because I don't have any use for it. But if you're flying a site for the first time, it's good because you can, if you're not sure what these site parameters are, you can instantly know if you've outlined your site correctly or not just by flying a couple of rows. Maybe you'll fly one this way, and then you'll fly one that way. So you won't fly the whole grid. You'll fly two separate direction grids, just the first leg, and that'll tell you if you're in the right ballpark, if you have to increase your grid at all. Best thing we've found too is that if you can, you want to fly the flight direction to get the longest legs, only because then you're not turning around so much. Helps with your battery life, the time it takes to fly your mission, and also if you're doing a lot of turns and stuff, it can throw your drone off a little bit. It's just better to have the longer flight legs, and of course that's in drone deploy. It's here under flight direction, so that's the best practice we found. Then you review the data you've gathered. If you look at your pictures, go in, make sure they're all clear. You've got good pictures. You don't have to look at all of them, but you spot check and make sure that you've got clear pictures. Pick up your ground control points and then pack up.
Right. So I actually want to stress, not just for mapping, but for anything, please review your data before you leave. Seriously, because sometimes, hey, stuff happens. It happens, and if you're there, you can fly it again. But if you're home, yikes, you can come back the next day, but only God knows if it's going to be the same, lighting, the same kind of day, et cetera, et cetera. So do review your data for anything before you go home.
And I'd be one of the first to say I don't really do that all the time, and it has bit me for cinematography.
Right.
Where I've changed a filter or something, and I've kind of I don't know, it's done a weird focus thing, and it's so bright out I can't really.
Yes, sir.
When I review data, I also copy from the SD card at the same time, so then
Music to my ears. I bring my laptop and 2 external hard drives. It goes to 3 places. You better believe it. Mm-hmm.
So that's the process. Any questions about the process? Off the top? Yes.
You said that the microwave reshoot should you always do it twice to make sure, or are you going to review the data and then someone gets the one
Yeah, the question is, do you would you want to shoot a building twice just to make sure you have what you need, or do you review the data and go back and make sure you have, fly anything that you maybe missed or that is not stitching correctly? Well, since stitching usually takes a long time, so that would be a good time. That would be a good case for using the live map, being able to see how it's stitching generally and if there are any anomalies, and then go back and fly it. Generally, I wouldn't fly a site twice at different angles and methods unless I knew there was something in maybe a previous map, or I see something that maybe was indicating that it might not stitch properly. Then I might take more care and maybe just refly that area and add it to the map.
Right, and it's not always necessary because, we fly the same site every week, and once you get the settings the way they are and you check the pictures and they're there, there's no need to reshoot or shoot the other way. We did it last week and we've done it 15 other times. We know this works. You know what I mean? So usually if we need to reshoot something, it would be the first or second time. And then we adjust whatever we need to adjust and be done with it, and that's it,
But of course, you have to remember this is a construction site, so when you start out, a lot of times we'll start out, of course, we're usually called in after the trees are yanked. somewhere between that before the building goes up. And so you have to account for all that as well. When you're flying, of course, when you start out on a site such as that, you've got, your 200 feet AGL is fine, but later on, when the building's up, you're flying at 200 feet AGL, you may be only 50 feet above the building. So you need to discuss this with your client. Where's the building going to be? How's it going to be situated? What are you going to want to see before anything goes up? And that's something you need to talk to them about. You need to anticipate all that, because they're not going to know that you need to know that, and the same thing with time lapses. A lot of times early on, I was in a situation where they wanted a time lapse, but they didn't tell me until the end. And, okay, well, maybe I can edit something together now using, I'll fly generally the same flight paths, but I don't normally program something that I can turn into a time lapse unless I know that they want that, just because it's kind of intensive to figure it out and fly the same thing. And
We need to invent a time machine,
So you need to anticipate all this stuff. You need to know what they're going to want and ask them questions. Even if they don't tell you, you need to ask them if they're going to want that. Yes, the back.
Is there any way you can elaborate a little bit more on the ground control points and how that provides accuracy inside the model?
Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Right, so the question was to talk about a little bit more about ground control points to increase accuracy in the ortho, right? Right, so
3D model.
in the 3D model. So in the 3D model, they help as not necessarily ground control points, but manual type points, where you can I like to take a minimum of 10 different pictures and tag the ground control point in 10 different pictures. That tells the software what the parallax really is, and it helps a lot with the 3D model. Now, they don't have to be ground control points for 3D models. They don't have to be ground control points per se, things that you lay down and then have to pick up. Many a times, the building, the structure that you're going to be making a 3D model of already has very defined points, an antenna, a chimney, whatever it is, and then you use those as manual type points, MTPs, so not necessarily ground control points because they don't need to be geotagged, and that helps just as good for the 3D mapping.
So basically what you're doing is you're telling the software where that picture goes, where that
pixel goes.
Right, and where
not
that
picture, but
is.
pixel.
Yeah. So
precise.
If you're doing
Right.
if you're doing type points, you're actually looking at points and you're saying this point is the same as this point is the same as on different pictures. So it's saying, oh, and then it finds those and says, oh, I had them over here. So it lines them back up so that your picture is more precise.
Right.
Ground control points take it even further by saying this point is at this latitude and longitude, because you've measured it before you put that ground control point down. And you know that, so these points, so it says, oh, so that's what makes manual type points are relative, whereas the
ground control points, yes, are more
precision,
absolute. So if you're
absolute.
measuring something, then But for a 3D model, we usually don't measure something. You don't need like exact measurements for it, yeah? You just need for the model to look good. And by the way, this is the same process that we use for, say cell tower inspection, that sort of thing. So, you don't need to geotag or have ground control points for a cell tower. How would you put them, right? So it's the same process. It's relative versus accuracy, and what you want to get. What is the deliverable? If it's accurate measurements, then yeah. If it's not, if it's just a good-looking 3D model, then manual type points, MTPs is all you need.
GPCs would be for if you're trying to get the accurate measurements.
Right.
Like for a civil engineering firm.
Right.
That's
yes,
exactly it. Yes, sir.
Anything.
Not that I know. My expertise really is in Pix4D. Mike uses Drone Deploy a hell of a lot more than I do. I use Pix4D is what I like, and I also use Zephyr. So 3D Flow Zephyr, I absolutely love that app.
Yeah, I use the GCPs and DD, but not the MTP.
Right.
Yeah. I prefer the Pix4D anytime I'm doing any kind of accuracy or pointing. Yes.
You mentioned earlier about how you use still photography also as walking around, and
Yes.
you add it to the same programs.
Yes.
How does it match those up?
With MTPs, with manual
It's-
type points. This is this, and it puts it all together. And I usually, for my 3D models, I take a DSLR, which is not geotagged whatsoever. It's an old Canon 7D, and boom, 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 boom. I take 100 pictures, whatever it is, and then manual type points, and it works fantastic.
Yep.
You better believe it. I just like the lens of my Canon better. Minor details.
Yeah.
Without breaking ground in a construction site, does drone deploy tell you what altitude you be at?
Does drone deploy tell you what altitude you be at when they're breaking ground at a construction site? No, I mean, that's just kind of like you kind of want to figure that out. I mean,
Yeah,
you want to
no.
fly. At that point, you probably want to fly as low as possible because there's not a whole lot of features. Normally, we're brought in after they've done the site work. They've already laid a lot of the, conduit and wires and underground stuff, even though it would behoove them to bring us in before that. So there's not a whole lot of features. There's not a whole lot of open ground. There may be, foundations and things,
So,
but.
Mike, 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to move on from here just real quick because we want to get to the meat of this thing. How do you find clients? Well, there's a lot of what we like to call drone aggregators, Drone Hive, Droners.io, which is Precision Hawk bot, a lot of other ones where, sign up as a pilot and, they get the jobs, they call you or you bid on the jobs. A lot of these things are very low paying. However, if you're new and you haven't done a whole lot of mapping,
Right.
but you're confident that you can, I would say go ahead and sign up for it. It's better to get paid for it and practice it that way than,
Then do it
somebody
for
else's
free.
dime and somebody else's reputation than to work for free. So another way would be to work for free until you're confident. But
Right.
cold calls, calling the construction companies, it's very difficult. But because they're very busy, even with the clients I've worked in, for firms, multi-billion-dollar firms that we work with, they one division or one project may not know about another project. What happens actually as we go along is that you're working with one group and maybe the two supers on that group will split off into separate projects and they'll remember you and they'll call you for those projects. But company-wide, it's very difficult to get in. You really actually have to knock on some doors and show them some stuff that you've done. Hopefully you've done some stuff and just tell them, what you can do for them. Show them what you can do for them. A lot of times they're one of the sites that I have a meeting with in a week, they were using manned aircraft up until very recently, like 2 months ago, for the site work on this site. And I've been working with that same company on different sites for 2.5 years now. And these people were still using manned aircraft for their site. They didn't know about the drone. So it's you just got to get in there. You got to try and talk to people. You got to reiterate it and let them know what you do. Another thing, schools, maybe your local community college.
So I teach at a community college. I teach drone technology. I teach all of that. And you wouldn't believe the amount of people that call the college trying to get a drone pilot, actually to go work commercially. So go, if you have a local community college close to you and they have a drone program, go talk to the guy in charge. It's usually a guy, not a girl, but it's usually, go talk to them and tell them what you do. Give them a demo, give them all of that, because when somebody calls asking, for a student who's not even Part 107 certified, so can't do it, they'll refer you. You know what I'm saying? Go talk to them. That's part of the relationships. If they have a drone event, go attend. In Carroll County in Maryland, which is where I teach, we just had a drone event. And I met no less than 50 different people that wanted drone services. Here, music to my ears, have my card, call me, I'll give you a proposal. All because I went to the event. So do attend those things.
Yeah, so knowledge sharing, that's the key thing.
Right.
I mean, that's basically what she's talking about, knowledge sharing. I mean, that's why we're here. We want to let people know that this is something you can do. And they'll, if you set yourself up, if you tell people, if you're the person explaining stuff to you, to other folks, they figure you know what you're talking about. And they'll call you, hopefully.
Right.
So it's all about knowledge sharing. It's all about just getting on panels, telling local, setting up panels at the schools, talking to your schools, say, hey, you guys don't have a program, I'll help you set it up. If that's something you can do, and you'll get work out of that. You'll not only and you'll build a network locally where you are. And people will look to you for knowledge and expertise, and they'll
Right.
eventually hire you.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of jobs in Carroll County. I don't even live there. I live in Anne Arundel County, so,
So a big thing is, how do you price your services? Oh my God, this is really, really difficult, let me tell you. You don't want to overprice, but you definitely don't want to underprice. It's like any other business. You want to know what it's costing you. A lot of people say, "Oh, you go on Droners.io." A lot of the people looking for drones say, "Oh, I just need a drone for 15 minutes. It'll only take me." Well, yeah, right. We all know, it takes you 15 minutes to set your drone up. It takes, it's crazy, but you need to factor all that in there. What's your drone cost? Well, let's go through this a little bit. If you're doing a construction site, first of all, you need the minimum, you need all the things: hard hat, steel-toe boots, eye protection, reflected vest, all that stuff. And there's a minimum. Normally, you may not need ear protection and glasses, but for the most part, you need the same thing.
4 minutes.
Yeah, great. Let me just run through this. But what really goes into this, and you won't know until you actually get the contract, and you're dealing not with a super who convinced them to hire you, but you're dealing with the front office that says, oh, you need $10 million of insurance. I had $1 million policy, and I got this big contract, and they're like, oh, but we need you to have $10 million. $10 million of drone insurance. First of all, my drone's not going to do that much damage to your site. But I was required to do that, and they also required me to get $1 million commercial on my car, even though I'm driving to the parking lot where everybody else is parking, and I'm walking into the site. So those are things that you got to take into consideration when you price your services. You got to figure out how long are you going to hire me for? Okay, well then I can figure out what I'm able to pay for from your thing. What are the deliverables? What are the deliverables? Do they want accurate? How accurate do they want their data to be? What data do they want? Are you laying ground control points? How much time is that going to take you? Are you going to have to buy a satellite receiver to locate those ground control points? How much is that going to cost you? You have to think about all those things, and until you know what the deliverables are, you're not going to know. How large is the site? That's going to impact how long you're on site, how many stills you're going to have to take, which leads you into processing time and limitations on your software. Some software charges you more by the more stills you upload, for instance. Drone Deploy has certain levels and limitations at different levels and price points, how many stills you can process in your ortho. How many missions are guaranteed? How precise do they want everything? Insurance, again, all kinds of things. Think about business liability, workers' comp. If you have people working with you, if you want to fly this by yourself the whole time, fine. You won't need workers' comp. It's just you for the most part. But if you have people working with you, or you're trying to sub out with somebody, you may have to get workers' comp for your company just to be able to hire a subcontractor when you are sick because you can't fly it this week or something. And that's it, pretty much in a nutshell. Let's take questions. First of all, here in the front row.
Yeah, where did you learn all this initially? I know there's a lot of school hard knocks here, but how did you get going before your first job?
How did we learn this? Well, I was fortunate. I actually, probably like 4 years ago, we were starting to get into it. I was hired by Uplift, which was bought by Precision Hawk. And they basically taught me how to do this. I mean, I had a background in it, and we'd already been flying drones for about 1.5 years before that. And we just kind of got into it that way as the industry was kind of growing up, and we grew with the industry. So that's how we got into it. Good question. What's a standard deliverable? For the most part, we deliver an ortho, which is an output from an online output in drone deploy, which is they go online. It looks like a Google Map, except it's very, it's not. They basically go online. They look at it online. You can do outputs, exports. You can do it lower resolution exports, PDFs, JPEGs. They're lower resolution, but they're good for them to look at. Also, we give them. Our standard package includes an edited video of the site, corner points of progress photos, which are usually JPEGs that we upload, an ortho, and a 3D model. If they want anything else, it's usually extra. But no, they can import.
It can be, but it's not.
So yeah, pretty
it's
much.
usually a JPEG. They can also download it as a TIFF or a PDF or whatever.
Yeah, so there are a whole lot of options.
But they usually view it online, just so that you know.
They'll look at it online.
On the software, say drone deploy, you give them the URL for where those files are, and they just go and look at them online, and they can measure their own stuff. They can do their own stuff.
Depending on your level of your subscription to the software.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
If you, it's sort of to answer this question, if you want a good taste of mapping, I did this. I contacted some people that I thought might need it. I said, I'll do this for free for you. And then I used the free trial periods of drone deploy and Pixtor to provide a service, get my name out there, and teach myself the software at the same time.
Good, yeah.
Music to my ears. Yeah. I like this guy.
Yeah. Also, we do pre-construction bids. So I'll tell my client, listen, you got something you want to bid on? We'll fly a flight for you for free.
Yeah.
Just let us know. We'll do it. And then they feel obligated later on when they get the job.
Sir.
Yes.
Actually, where I stand on that. So one of the challenges I operate in the North Texas region, is that a lot of times I find myself trying really hard to avoid doing free consulting. A lot of these people, contract management companies, land management companies, or general contractors, know that everybody else is kind of looking at this, but they don't really know for sure. I did a lot of what you did, which was kind of cold calling people, going to these people. The disconnect I've found, and I'm having the thickest of the time getting around it, is making an impactful demo, and then actually being able to follow that up with actionables, like what is our next step type thing. Have you had that challenge as well?
Well, let me tell you, and that's a good point. Something I left out is that you need to figure out what your niche is. You need to figure out, and more than that, you have to provide something that they're not. You have to tell them. You have to be more than a drone pilot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You have to tell them what the data means. You need to be prepared to say, hey, this is what's going on here, and give them reports that they find helpful, not just throw stuff at them that they don't know what to do with. You need to tell them what to do with the data and the pictures and what they're seeing, what they're getting. That's the key thing. You need to provide something other than being a drone pilot, somebody providing this. You need to tell them what they're seeing, because I'm flying these missions and I'm 6 months in, and one of the guys on the site's like, hey, can you take a picture really, really high to show the whole site? Because I want to see the whole site. I'm like, you don't look at the ortho? I do an ortho every week, and you can drill down or you can see the whole site. And it's like, oh. And this is like, 6 months. This wasn't the super, but it was one of the main guys in the office.
Right.
And there's this disconnect. So you really have to tell them what they're looking at and reiterate it to everybody, and just give them, show them the value somehow. And it's hard to tell what that is or how that is, but you need to figure out what that is. You need to know how to communicate that, figure out how to communicate that, and communicate it clearly.
Right. So I just want to reiterate what the gentleman said. And, we have an advantage, Mike and I, that we've been in video production for 30-some years, and whether it's from a drone or from a tripod camera or a handheld, it doesn't really matter. We know how to make a demo that communicates something really cool and all of that. So my advice to you guys, if you haven't been in video for a long time, get together with somebody who has and have them help you create a demo that is impacting, because, you need to communicate decently what it is, the services that you're providing. And sometimes if you don't have the background to actually be able to communicate that in an audiovisual way, it's not going to be as effective. So let me just put it that way. If you haven't been in video for a long time, get together with somebody who has and have them help you.
Yeah, and the other thing is a lot of these sites are proprietary, even though they're like building buildings. I think we've been building buildings for hundreds of years.
Right.
For some reason, their way of building this building is secret. So you don't want anybody to know. So you, unfortunately, you can't show any of this stuff to any other non-firm client. So if you're going after another firm, it's like, well, I'd
Right.
like to show you, but I can't. So you ended up flying their site for free to show them what they can do with their site. So that's a big problem a lot of times.
Right. So you had a comment?
Oh, no, I was going to say, if you want to get real good education, I don't know about X4D, but Drone Deploy has a load of information.
Yes.
And I
That's a
use
good
that
point.
when I go out
Yes.
to talk to clients. So, when you want to go fly a site, his suggestion, sign up for free, but they have so much information. I mean, you won't get through it if you were reading every day for a month. There's just so much information there. They have some little videos. And also look on YouTube for pictures or videos of people who use Pix4D and Drone Deploy. There's a lot of information. People who are in this industry want to teach others how to benefit from it.
Right.
Real quick comment. Number one, you got to be a salesman. First and foremost, to get clients. Number two is under promise, over deliver. If you can, so most of these guys, just like you said a little bit ago, can you fly really high? Well, I delivered with an ortho with their blueprints overlaid, and it just blew them out of the water. So
Right.
under promise, over deliver. And know your clients' pain points before you go talk to them, and know their lingo. So
Oh, yeah.
each industry has their own lingo. So if you don't talk the talk that they're talking, they're gonna see you right out. They'll hear you out, but you won't get that phone call.
Absolutely
yeah, that's a very
right.
good point. Yeah,
Absolutely
I
right.
learn something every day, and they respect that.
Don't show up on a site without
Yeah. I mean, even for a meeting, wear your hard hat, wear your boots and your jeans.
Do not
Look
use
the
a clean hard hat. Bang it,
Put some
throw some
stickers
dirt on
stuff.
it,
Put your
whatever it is.
name-
Don't show up
Put
with
your
a
name on your hard
brand
hat.
new thing.
Some just go by a construction site, talk to somebody, look at some pictures or something of a construction worker.
All
and
right.
then
So
be like,
we have to
"Sorry,
stop because it's after our allowed time. But thank you for coming, guys. If you want to contact, thank you.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to get started here. My name is Sean Gordon. I am a certified level 1 thermographer, SUS certified thermographer. I do our aerial operations for Simpson Gumperton Hager, an engineering firm based out of Boston. My colleague Chris Gray is also a certified level 1 thermographer and is a senior project engineer. A little louder? Okay. A little too short for this microphone. There we go. This session on drone applications in the building industry, we're going to take a high-level look on how our firm is using drones and a more detailed look on how we're using thermal imaging to assess building performance. For those of you that may have been here for the prior presentation by AES, some of our slides will be discussing a similar concept, however, in a different industry and quite to a much smaller scale. I'll briefly be introducing our firm and explaining the type of work we do, discussing how we began using drones and how we are currently using them. My focus will be explaining on how we're implementing them to enhance our existing work and some of the complications surrounding that. Chris will then take a deeper dive into the engineering side of thermal imaging and show project-related examples. And we'll be sure to leave time at the end for some questions, if there are any. So SGH is, we're an engineering firm founded by 3 MIT professors over 60 years ago. We're headquartered in the Boston area with offices in major urban areas around the country and over 600 employees. Our focus is the design, investigation, and rehabilitation of existing structures and building enclosures. Our work spans multiple markets outside of just buildings, including science and defense, infrastructure, nuclear, and water and wastewater. As you can see, we're obviously not a drone company. We are an engineering firm that is supplementing our work with drones to improve our work when applicable, when the job actually calls for it. So how our aerial operations began. My role in the company began about 13 years ago when I was hired to work in our small group in our Boston office called, in our headquarters and outside of Boston called Graphics. Our responsibility is essentially to support our engineers with anything visual in nature that wasn't drafting, including generating figures for reports, presentations, litigation work, structural photography, things like that. We saw a need to evolve our capabilities just to keep up and to kind of keep busy and to provide useful services to our internal clientele. So we purchased our first drone, a Phantom 2, in about 2015 with very minimal research. Didn't really know much about the technology or the regulations. It's exactly what it sounds. It was an impulse buy. We spent some time after that researching FAA restrictions, learning about Section 333, and I was petitioning heavily to get a pilot's license, paid for, but that didn't go so well, unfortunately. Still trying. No. Once Part 107 was established, my time was spent pretty much just mainly researching and evaluating ways that I could use drones to improve our firm's work product. I understood that this process was going to be slow, because everything pretty much is in a large firm like this, and it was going to blossom organically, and it would only work if I had the desire to put in the work and make it happen. So I acquired my Part 107 in July 2017 and began marketing internally to increase awareness within the company to try to get kind of people excited about it. Took a couple months and we got our insurance squared away in October, and we began regular work in 2018. We're going to start it in the winter, but if I could stay out of the cold for a little longer, I didn't mind that. So, seeing as the firm was providing high quality work for over 60 years, there have been many complications getting people to jump on board with a new technology. A lot of it stems from the need to change the thought process, so the potential drone use is considered early in the proposal phase instead of as an added cost. People look at this as just, if they're not familiar with it, they just look at it as an expense. So there's a stigma associated that assumes that something like this adds a lot to the project budget, when in fact it generally reduces cost or at the very least provides a better quality result at a similar price. Even with these complications, we've been fortunate enough to see pretty steady growth over the past couple of years. Personally, I've been overwhelmed with drone information, capabilities, flight programs, all sorts of, there's just so many things out there, as I'm sure you all know. So my focus, my realization is, well, I need to provide a service that will enhance the work product for our firm and for the work we provide to our clients. Everything that we know at SGH regarding drones is learned by me through mistakes, through trial and error, through research. It's all self-taught. So I'm the first to admit that I don't know everything when it comes to this. Like I said, we're an engineering firm. We're not a drone company. I make a point to keep evolving, keep learning, trying to learn new ways to better our work. And anybody that out there that does similar work, I would appreciate chatting about this after, and any suggestions, comments that you have, I would greatly encourage. So that led us to the realization, as I said, we need to focus our efforts on services that our engineers will find value, and that, like I said, narrowed down our capabilities and services. So like many drone operators, site mapping for us was a starting point. It's easy to automate, provides a quick and valuable overview of a project site. We have a large group of civil engineers that we anticipated would be heavy users of this early on. Turns out they weren't. They didn't seem to think it provided much value for them at the time. I'm hoping still to convince them, getting closer. But we tested this and other uses out early on. We found it wasn't something that we were going to spend a ton of time on. So we still do them periodically, but we've decided we're not going to really focus our time and expenses on improving this. So this really led us to what we do the majority of now, which is visual condition assessments. Upwards of 90% of the drone-related work we do falls under visual condition assessments. It can be broken down into visual or thermal. Thermal is probably about 2/3 of the total condition assessments we do. It can be done for a variety of reasons, including historic restoration, structural evaluation, pre and post construction, pre-purchase surveys, binocular surveys, and any number of other assessments. Generally, what we're looking for is observations to help provide a building owner with a strategy for future maintenance or repair. Depending on the project, the level of detail required could be as much as hairline cracks. So, it varies quite a bit. As much as I would like to be out there on every job, and I feel like almost every job we do could benefit from a drone in some way, it's important for us as a firm to maintain the standard of care and the high level of the quality work we've been providing for 60 plus years. So a drone will never replace a hands-on inspection if a hands-on inspection is in fact required. This can be a matter of life safety. That's what it comes down to. And because of this, some of our engineers are still very hesitant to use drones. So some of our typical operation procedures, depending on the project, obviously we need to file waivers, we need to, get authorizations. So we make sure, depending on where the project is, we have everything squared away for that. Really, though, the in-office coordination tends to be the most complicated aspect of my operation procedures. Working with hundreds of engineers, they all have their own deadlines and expectations, and those don't always go hand in hand with reality. Some people tend to think that they can ask me in the morning to do a project in downtown Boston, and I can do it by the afternoon. Sometimes I can, but usually not. Usually we need some sort of lead time. There's a mixed level of experience, so you gotta have to balance that a little bit, and it can get a little frustrating, but it's a learning curve, and we just have to keep teaching people. As the only current drone operator in our firm, I've made a very strong effort to establish safety standards. We are going to be training more operators or potentially hiring operators over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And as the person that will be responsible for this growth, I need to be sure that our future operators are able to problem solve in a safe and efficient manner, and that we can maintain the same quality. So we don't want different operators performing different inspections. So. And it's essential for us to have these procedures in place to ensure a safe operation and compliance with the FAA. So most of our flights are generally automated. This improvement in data collection has proven to be the biggest selling point when pitching the use of a drone. The horizontal stuff is typically automated. The vertical stuff, as some of you may know, is a little more complicated to automate. There's some softwares out there that have been doing a better job with it, but it's still, in my opinion, not 100% reliable quite yet, and definitely not as easy as horizontal mapping is. Typical binocular surveys can be very painstaking. Now following the simple flight path, like the one on the top left here, we can do a similar survey without neck strain while capturing 100% of the building. Binocular surveys on a brick building, something like this, can be very easy to get lost, to lose your place if you go to make a note on a drawing. So capturing 100% of the building has assured that our engineers don't miss any observations, which is obviously very important. Sometimes we need real-time analysis. If we need quick results, we will provide the on-site engineer with their own tablet and add an additional team member as a visual observer, so we can get sort of instant answers. Technology has made it relatively simple to capture the data, which is great. The real focus for us, though, as I think a lot of people will reiterate, is anybody can really capture data or photos. It's really a matter of how you analyze the data. So, as I've mentioned, we tailor our work product to what our engineers need. Our most common deliverable is just simply a collection of images that we take and organize them into folders by elevation, floor, whatever makes the most sense based on the structure. On the right, there's a very funhouse mirror-looking example of a facade survey of around 130 photos run through an in-house program that we created that essentially it arranges the thumbnails in order, and it allows you to click on the thumbnail, blow it up to full size, add comments, add annotations. It's a very user-friendly interface that we can customize and adjust based on the project. If our intent is to do this in the beginning, we will customize the flight plan so we fly in a more controlled way, so it doesn't kind of come out looking like this. This was not the best example for this, but it was a relatively recent one. So this provides, like I said, a familiar and easy to use deliverable for the client. They see this version of their facade. They see their building, they can click on it and view any comments that our engineers have, any observations, any suggestions for repairs, any number of things like that we can adjust. So this is something we would do to replace a typical binocular survey where hands-on inspection is not part of our scope. This type of work will help our clients hone in on areas that might need some attention. We do several roof surveys, most of which are thermal. Chris will get into that quite a bit. These are almost automated, always automated for the most part. The first step in this process is creating a visual orthomosaic, as you see on the top left. We use this to sort of establish a baseline before we capture the thermal images. This will help us locate any thermal anomalies, any dirt, ponding water, anything like that. It's not a replacement for being on the roof, but we found this to be quite helpful as the first step in the process. On a few occasions, we are asked to create a point cloud, like on the bottom left here. They don't really do anything for inspection purposes. There are some ways you can use them for inspection, but for the most part, it's a nice deliverable, and it's great for reporting purposes. All right, so to dive in a little bit on thermal here, Chris has been on the forefront of thermal imaging at SGH for a number of years, about 8 years now. Prior to using drones, Chris and his staff would spend countless hours in the cold, lugging ladders on roofs to provide clients with valuable information about their buildings. Unfortunately, the cold is the best time to do this, so being in the Northeast, we've done a lot of these in some very cold weather. It's a time-consuming and potentially unsafe process, depending on the roof, depending on the conditions, the weather. So we did a few of these together, a few roof scans together with the drone. Some roofs that if you did by hand the old-fashioned way would take 4+ hours. We did some of them in 20, 30, 40 minutes. And after that, I would like to say I don't think he's ever looked back. I don't think he's done a hand scan since then. And none of his staff ever want to do a hand scan again, that's for sure. So he quickly saw the potential to provide our clients with a better service, saving them money and time, and just a safer environment for our staff as well. Some benefits are some complex roofs that were previously inaccessible by hand would have been required additional safety measures, tie-offs, things like that. We can now scan with relative ease. The improved imagery that we get, sort of this straight down image instead of like an angled image from a ladder or something like that, it allows us to provide a better quality report to our clients. We're able to create a thermal orthomosaic that we use to identify potential areas of concern. If necessary, which happens frequently, Chris will get into one of these examples as well, our engineers will suggest a roof opening to get a little bit deeper into what the underlying issue could be. And our deliverables vary quite a bit based on project. We actually have an in-house group called our digital lab group that works with us to basically program whatever we want. So if we can come up with something, we just try to stump them as much as we can, and they generate whatever it is that whatever crazy idea we come up with in our brain. It's their job to kind of figure out how to program and create that. So our deliverables are pretty much always evolving. We're just trying to do whatever we can to provide the best possible dynamic deliverable to our client in the most efficient and budgetary conscious way. So that's sort of our goal. Now Chris is going to jump into a deeper dive in some of the infrared applications that we work with on a regular basis.
How's this volume in the back? Good? Bad? All right. So as Sean mentioned, I'm a project manager for SGH. Been there about 8 years, and I'm on the facade consulting side. So my background is structural engineering, but our facade consulting group essentially works with architects and owners to diagnose building enclosure-related problems. We work on new buildings, helping architects design their enclosures and do all the detailing associated with that. So as you'll see in the next several slides, we're using thermal imaging on both sides of that scope, on both existing buildings and new buildings. And before I jump into it, there's one big example that we just recently did 4 or 5 months ago that really proved to a lot of people in our firm why we should be using drones for especially thermal imaging of roofs. And so this was a 46 building complex in a city. Every building was about 20 stories tall. We were actually contracted originally through the owner to help them design the roof replacement for all 46 buildings. And the interesting thing was that the choice that they made to actually replace all the roofs was based on a single infrared scan or handheld scan that a surveying company did for the owner. And so this company went out, they scanned all 46 roofs. They essentially said every roof is wet. You need to replace every roof on the complex. And so that's not a small amount of money. That was about an $18 million roof replacement project. So when we first got contracted with the owner, we asked them for those IR reports. And once we received them, it was pretty clear that we really couldn't use any of the data that was actually taken or given to us. So the reports essentially just had a roof plan, and there was just an arrow that pointed to the middle of the roof and said the whole roof is wet, and there were like 2 photos with every report. So for us, we couldn't really use that information that well. So we went back to the owner and said, we want to rescan all of the buildings. And originally the owner was kind of hesitant to do that, but we convinced them that they may not need to actually replace all 46 roofs, and that we didn't necessarily think that the IR scan reports that they got originally were correct. And so this project had a lot of challenges. First off, it's in a city that had a no drone policy everywhere in the city. It was in an airport flight path. It was literally across the river from a major airport. And there was a height restriction, of course, due to the flight path. So when we first started this, we thought this was going to be a no-go from the beginning with the drone. But once we dug into it further, we contacted the city. We told them what we wanted to do. We said if we wanted to hand scan all 46 buildings again, we estimated it would take us 15 nights. And that assumes that you get 15 good weather nights in a row, which would never happen. So it would probably take us over a month to get this actually done. So once we explained that to the city and explained our whole process of when we were going to do it, they got on board. And then as far as the flight path issue goes, we kind of got lucky in that aspect because the landing strip that lines up right with this complex just happened to be down for repair work. And so we had a very small window of time we could actually get in there and fly all 46 buildings. And we did all 46 buildings in 2 nights. And so, we took the data that we got from those scans. We went back to the owner, and the owner wasn't planning on doing all 46 buildings at once. They were going to do it phased, over a couple of years, and we were able to prioritize, certain roofs based on those scans, which we would have not been able to do based on the IR reports that we had before. So the fact that we were able to, scan 46 buildings in 2 nights compared to the 15 plus nights that it would have taken us to hand scan, I think shows the usefulness of the drone. No. They are going to replace all 46 just because they want to get them all kind of on a baseline, but they weren't all wet. So as far as kind of trends go, we're seeing thermal imaging being used more and more, especially on the enclosure side of things. ASHRAE did a study back in 2008 where they surveyed a whole bunch of buildings across the U.S. and essentially looked at insurance claims. And they found that approximately 70% of insurance claims for buildings came down to enclosure-related problems. And that's compared to, structural problems, mechanical problems. And so, there's been, just within the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a heightened, sense of everybody needs to focus on making sure the enclosure is properly constructed. And so one of the ways you can do that is by using QA/QC testing. And QA/QC testing is essentially any type of test you can do on the facade or on the building itself to confirm what's built is actually kind of what the owner originally wanted in the first place. And so thermal imaging falls into that category. So we're using infrared on a wide variety of uses or topics. And I'm going to go through each one of these quickly. But the first one is wet roofing. So this is mainly existing buildings. So a lot of times what our role is an owner contacts us because they're either A, being told by a roofing contractor that they need to replace their roof, they're reporting leakage through the roof, or the roof is just out of warranty and they think they need to replace it. And so we generally will perform a condition assessment of the entire roof system for them. and make recommendations on how long we think the roof will last and when they think they need to replace it. And so one of the very first things we do on all of these now is do an infrared scan of the roof to see if we can determine how much water is in the roof. And it also allows us to pinpoint where we want to make openings, because a lot of these condition assessments require openings. We don't necessarily have drawings that show exactly what's there. So, how this works is water can store heat, much better than, dry materials. So if you have saturated roofing insulation, when that is cooling, it will cool at a slower rate compared to adjacent dry materials, because it stores that heat that it's absorbed throughout the day longer than anything that's dry. And so typically when we're performing these, we're doing them at night. We, as Sean mentioned, we'll go out, about an hour before sunset. We'll scan the roof with a digital camera just to get that baseline. And then about an hour or 2 hours after sunset, sometimes 3 or 4, depending on the roof type, we'll do the thermal imaging of the roof after the fact. And so what you're generally looking for is exactly what you see on the screen here. You're looking for kind of warmer spots around the roof that are indicative of, moisture within the roofing assembly. And so one of the things, there's a lot of interpretation that has to happen, because these warm spots can be caused by a whole slew of other issues. But drones have actually, and one of those issues is reflections. So when you're looking through a handheld IR camera, surfaces that are reflective, such as metal panel and just walls in general, will reflect heat back down onto the roof, and you'll see that in the IR camera. By using the drone, you can get higher, you're more vertical on the roof, and it kind of minimizes a lot of the issues that we have with handheld. And so ultimately what we try to get to, or our end goal for these IR scans is to ultimately get something like this, a fully stitched radiometric image of the entire roof. This is pretty problematic. It's been problematic so far. This is probably the best one that we have. Because stitching radiometrics, if anybody knows, is a difficult thing that a lot of companies haven't figured out yet. And some companies that have figured it out yet, it doesn't work that well. And so one of the other issues that we have with this is once it's fully stitched, temperatures also change as you're doing the scan. Because remember, we're doing it an hour after sunset. Everything's cooling at a very rapid rate. So if you start scanning on this side, by the time you get to this side, things could be a couple degrees cooler. And then when you go to stitch that at the end of the flight, the programs need to account for that somehow. And a lot of times we're not necessarily focused on the temperatures that we're seeing when we get these images. We're looking for patterns. And so from our standpoint, I don't really care what the temperatures are. All I care about is getting like the pretty photo at the end that I can look at and see the thermal anomalies. So generally what we're doing now, where we can't fully stitch roof images, we're mainly just taking kind of the smaller shots that we have and get throughout the mapping, and we'll associate them with certain areas on roof plans, and then that'll help us identify where we want to make roof cuts. And then we'll make those roof cuts afterwards, and hopefully you don't see, a bunch of water in your roof. So I mentioned we do it on new buildings as well, and this ties back to that kind of QA/QC thing, kind of method that you can help prevent, building issues long term. So a lot of times, thermal scans of roof systems on new buildings are becoming almost industry standard for every project. And some authorities like the Mass School Building Authority, which is a state department, they require it now on all of their projects. So it's one of these things where it's not like a pass-fail test, but you can look at it and you can determine whether or not you think there's water on the roof. And contractually, a lot of roofing contractors are now tied to this test or to the scan, and they're actually required to go back and open literally every area that we flag as a potential issue. And that's what you're seeing here. And a lot of people may think that you do a new roof, you won't have water under it, and that is certainly not the case. There's a lot of things that go into re-roofing a building, and water can get into new roofing systems in a wide variety of ways. So the next one, kind of moving to walls. The first kind of most basic wall scan that you can do is looking for missing wall insulation or thermal bridging. And we don't do these ones alone that often, mainly because common wall systems now are mostly cavity wall systems, so they're drained. They have some sort of air cavity behind the cladding that you see. And that air cavity really skews pretty much any effect that you'll be able to kind of see as far as thermal bridging goes and or missing insulation, because the insulation is usually tucked back behind that air cavity. So that air cavity, which is usually vented, is just prevents you from using IR and to try to see missing insulation. Doesn't mean you can't do it on every building or certain buildings, but just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, the top right is a cold storage facility. So we're starting to see a lot of existing buildings being converted to cold storage facilities. And if anybody knows anything about cold storage facilities, they're generally just kind of like prefab insulated metal panels that they smush together with some sealant. And generally, it's not the best performing kind of wall system that you can get. And so that's what you're seeing here in the top right is just air and air leakage essentially through panel joints and thermal bridging through the joints as well. Bottom right is just cladding attachment supports. So that's a thin stone veneer on a building. And so there's metal cladding, there's metal attachments that actually anchor the stone back. And so all you're seeing there is the thermal bridging that bisects through the insulation to the backup wall. And then on the left is kind of a unique one that we recently did. We actually pressurized this building, which I'll get into in a little bit, but when we first scanned it without pressure, we saw all these thermal anomalies kind of around these spandrel areas, and come to find out the building was overclad. There was an existing building, beneath that new skin. And so there was a big gap between the new cladding and the old building that we just had no idea what was going on in there. And so, there's something going on because you can clearly see there's a whole bunch of thermal bridging that's happening. And when we pressurized the building, we didn't see any difference in those, so it has to be thermal bridging. And one of the aspects, Sean kind of alluded to it, a lot of the standards require you to essentially make test cuts and confirm that what you're identifying as anomalies in your thermal reports are actually defects in the building. So in our report for this, we're essentially recommending that they open and take some panels off to see what's actually behind there to confirm what's causing that anomaly. But the owner didn't want to do that in this case, so now we're just left to kind of, hypothesize what it is. So then really the big one is a pressure test of a building. And these are kind of the most dramatic IR shots, I think, that you get when you're doing thermal imaging of buildings. But they can be kind of complex because you got to pressurize the building. And I'll get into pressurizing in a little bit. But the idea is that you scan the entire building once without any pressure whatsoever. And then you pressurize the building either positively or negatively, and then scan the building again. So if you're positively pressurizing, you would scan from the outside, usually with a drone or handheld. If you're negatively pressurizing, you would scan from the inside just with a handheld. Or if you have the drone that can bounce into walls and things like that, then you could use that. But generally what you're looking for are just differences. Again, similar to the roof, you're looking for temperature differences. And so something like this on the bottom left here is representative of this transition between some curtain wall glazing system framing and an adjacent brick wall. And so, when we see air leakage and anomalies that look like this, we know for sure that that's indicative of air leakage coming from the interior to the exterior. And so that means that somebody missed a seal at that one location. Similarly, you have, something in the middle of a wall that wasn't there under no pressure. You know that there's some sort of defect in the backup areas of the wall system. And then roof transitions are notorious for being problematic areas because you've got multiple subcontractors that are coming together, and they just seem to be forgotten about on a lot of projects. So whenever you pressurize a building, that's usually where we see a lot of issues. And so here's just a couple more shots to kind of show. This was one building. By the way, it was a brand new school. So you can see new buildings certainly have a lot of issues as well. Then specific to glass, this was actually another building that we were scanning, not looking for glass defects, but we ended up seeing this as we were scanning the building. And what you're seeing is a reduction in R value in the insulated glass unit. And typically you don't scan glass with an infrared camera because it's so reflective. So if you look at glass with an infrared camera, like right on, you will just see your direct reflection right in there. But when the glass units start losing argon gas or the air that's between the two pieces of glass, you can start getting temperature differences between different units. And so there was a wide variety of kind of not failures per se, because they weren't fogging, and mainly because it was a brand new building. But if I was to put money on which units may fog first in the future, it would definitely be these. And this was one of these things where like nobody expected to see this when we scanned the building, and it kind of threw a wrench into the whole project. But the owner ended up just accepting it as is. So. And then paver, concrete delamination. This is kind of a unique one that we stumbled upon more recently. We had a client that asked us to scan a big plaza, a very uniquely shaped plaza, and the reason they asked us to scan was mainly because somebody just on the architectural team just went out with a handheld IR camera and started seeing things, and they didn't actually know what it meant. And so we dug into it a little more, and then we actually went out and scanned the whole plaza, and they were worried about debonded plaza pavers, and so that's what you're seeing here. So these three pavers here correlate to these three pavers here. So you can see the difference. This paver is almost fully bonded. This one's, mostly bonded, or, minimally bonded, and then this one is kind of somewhere in the middle. So what you're seeing is based on thermal mass. So when the paver was fully set in the setting bed, it's connected to the actual setting bed, which is a huge, essentially a large bed of concrete that anchors the pavers down. And so when that heats up during the day, as long as it's connected to the paver, when it starts cooling down, you'll start seeing all of that, the thermal radiation coming up through the pavers. And then similarly, if it's not bonded, you can see that it's a little cooler than the adjacent ones. And so what we ended up providing the owner on this project was a fully laid out, plan of the plaza, and we're very easily able to, identify which kind of rows had issues. And then, you take it a step further, you can set this up so that you click on a row and it brings up all the representative images that the drone took. And we actually hand scanned this plaza as well, but to go through the level of effort and tying everything to kind of a PDF that then you can then click and get the images would be very difficult to do by hand scanning. So having the drone, having GPS coordinates and knowing exactly where it was at all times made things a lot easier for the end result. One of the big takeaways that I try to give in most of these talks is there's industry standards for almost anything out there, and that applies specifically to thermal scanning. We don't always perform scans on the projects that we're on. Sometimes we're reviewing reports from other either drone companies or other engineering firms that do these scans. And it's pretty amazing to me that there's some drone companies out there that will go out and buy an infrared camera and offer that as a service and just scan a building or a roof, and they actually have no idea what they're looking at. And it's a big problem because we've had this happen before where, we have to rely on a report, and that report gives us false data. We had a different one from the one that I talked about earlier, where an owner, very in a similar situation, they were thinking about replacing their roof, and a drone company went out, scanned the roof, gave them a report, flagged a bunch of issues. Come to find out, they had no idea these industry standards existed. They scanned at the completely wrong time. They scanned in the middle of the morning, so as the sun was rising, you were getting UV radiation on the roof, and they were claiming that some of the areas were issues and wet insulation when it actually wasn't. It was just the sun coming up and hitting those areas. So these industry standards are critical to knowing how to actually perform these scans, because if you do it incorrectly, you just get data that doesn't mean anything to anybody, and whoever just paid you to do it just wasted a whole ton of money. So some of the factors that affect thermal scans, there's a whole slew of other factors, but these are the main ones, and I'm focusing mainly on roofs because a lot of our work deals with roofs. A lot goes into scanning walls in full buildings, but compared to roof scans, which can be relatively quick. And I'll go through each one of these. So the first one is vantage point, and this actually goes to why we're switching to drones for almost all of our roof scans to begin with. So as Sean mentioned, the older way that we did these scans was you used a handheld camera. Anybody that's messed with one of these handheld cameras, there's a 15-degree field of view essentially from the camera. And so if you imagine you're just standing over a roof, looking down at the roof with the camera, a 15-degree view does not buy you a whole lot of area to actually look at. And so that's what you're seeing in the left. And the problem with that is you could be potentially standing in a big area of wet insulation and not know you're actually in an area of wet insulation because you're not seeing the temperature difference between the wet area and the dry area. So typically what we do, or what we were doing, was bringing ladders, 6 to 8 foot ladders with us that we would lug around the roof. We'd put it up, we'd do 360-degree shots, we'd move the ladder another 20 feet this way, do the same thing, and we just march around the roof. And so, it was a very time-extensive exercise to hand scan these. And so if you take that same 15-degree range that you have with the handheld and you apply it to a drone, you've instantly increased your field of view, exponentially. And so that's where we're seeing the biggest benefit, is really just being able to capture larger areas at once. And as Sean mentioned, the drone program at our firm kind of was a test run. We were just figuring things out as we went. And when we first bought the drone, Sean and I went out and scanned a bunch of buildings just to kind of get the feeling down. And one of the things that none of the standards really tell you out there is, what height should you be flying at to get the best results. And this was kind of just a test run where we went above a building. This is our office, or our old office. And we just, kept increasing elevation to see if things changed as we got higher. And as you can imagine, the resolution isn't changing. So as you get higher, the less quality that you're going to get from your image. But we generally found that with 50 to 100 feet above a roof, generally gets you the best imagery. And so usually what we do when we're doing a roof is we'll go out and we'll map the entire roof at 50 to 100 feet. In our very regimented mapping program, so you can get the stitching afterwards. And then once we're done that, we'll go and fly at 300 or 400 feet and just get overall shots. And we'll quickly process the overall shots to see if there's anything we need to get onto the roof afterwards to look at. One of the other, probably the biggest factor that can affect results is the environment itself. Thermal scans are essentially a direct function of what kind of environment you're scanning in. So the ASTM standards that I listed on a couple slides ago, they have some recommended / requirements for minimums to perform each of these scans. But you can see the one that I've highlighted here, they kind of just punt on that one and say varies depending on assembly. So that really leaves it open to whoever's performing the scan to know what they're doing, so that they know that know that they need to perform it under very specific good conditions. So as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of these at night. We need daytime to nighttime temperature swings. If you don't get that cooling effect at night, the scan's not going to be effective. Daytime weather, usually you're not looking for, there can't be any water on the roof because water is reflective and it will just skew any result. You won't be able, the scan will be essentially ineffective at areas of water. And then wind can also affect the scan as well. Along those same lines of environmental factors, especially during the wintertime in the Northeast, can be a problem for us. If the temperature of the roof surface drops below the dew point in the air, you're going to get dew on the roof, and that water, essentially treat it like ponded water, it skews all the results across the entire roof. So, when we were hand scanning, this happened quite a bit, and you essentially have to pack up and go home and try again another day, another night. In some cases, it's actually made it easier because if you're hovering if the whole roof is hovering, or the dry areas are hovering below the dew point, but the wet areas, which are in theory warmer than the dry areas, are hovering still above the dew point, you won't actually get dew where there's wet insulation, which is what you're seeing on the top photo. So you could theoretically just walk around the roof and look for areas where there's no dew, and you'd know where the wet insulation is on the roof. And then one of the other big ones is roof types. Like every roof's a little different. And really what's critical for this, for a scan to be successful, is that the roof is insulated. And what I mean by that is there's some sort of waterproofing or roof membrane, and then there's insulation below that can absorb water. Because if you're scanning a roof, this in theory relies on the water being absorbed into materials to make those materials saturated. And so, we've generally had great success with the single-ply roof systems, the EPDMs and TPOs, and so those are the majority of the roofs that we scan because that's mostly what's being used on new buildings. We've had moderate success with built-up roofs, so if anybody doesn't know what a built-up roof is, it's usually kind of like a hot mop asphalt with a bunch of gravel above it. In a lot of locations in the U.S., you can't even build those types of roofs anymore, so we've had moderate success with those, though, and then we've had poor success with inverted assemblies, so that's, like a plaza assembly where you have waterproofing on a deck with some sort of insulation above it. And then asphalt shingle roofs that are interior insulated, because if you think about that, you need the insulation to absorb water, and usually there's an underlayment or a membrane below the shingles that prevents you from kind of seeing below that. And then I have ballasted roof systems highlighted, mainly because prior to having the drone, we had that considered into the poor success category. And a lot of that is because gravel varies in thickness along the roof. And if you remember the thermal mass that I was talking about with the plaza assembly, the thicker the gravel, the warmer it's going to be, and the slower it's going to cool down at night. And so what you'd essentially see is what you're seeing here, where you have thick areas of gravel, and then you have thinner areas of gravel. And that makes it look like there's an issue there, but it's not actually an issue. It's just heavier gravel. And the temperature differences aren't really enough to kind of make it muted across the image, especially with a handheld. But as soon as you get it on a drone, those temperature differences get muted quite a bit, and you don't see the variations in the gravel, and you essentially get what you're looking at up here, which is you're only seeing the anomalies, you're not seeing thicknesses and variations in the gravel. And then interpreting the data is pretty critical. As Sean mentioned, we're engineers. We're on a lot of these projects that we're scanning. And especially the new ones where we're involved through design, construction. We're out there multiple times a week looking at construction work that's going on. And so when you're scanning a wall, you could go hire a drone company to scan a wall, or a building. But having intimate knowledge of how the building is constructed, I think, is a big benefit for us because we can eliminate some of the things that we're seeing as potential issues based on what we know about the enclosure. And so this is just an example where, we pressurize this building, and you can see that there's a random warm spot that popped up, and this was ended up just being a transition between, cladding systems that you see down here. And then, we actually ended up going back to our construction photos, and we found, there actually is, a complex transition here. We have multiple trades coming together, and something was probably missed. But if you didn't have that knowledge when you're doing the scan, or even after the scan, you would essentially just be providing your client, a marked up elevation saying, we think there's something here. And based on this, we're typically recommending they pull cladding off to, repair things like this. But I think that's whoever's doing scans needs to be able to interpret, or should be able to interpret the scans as they're going as well. And then I mentioned building pressurization previously. This is a kind of a big coordination item up front if you're going to scan a building using thermal imagery. And if you're looking for air leakage, you essentially need to do this. And it's not possible on every building. So every mechanical system on every building is slightly different. Some new buildings that we've scanned, there's just a mechanical contractor on site with a laptop plugged into the mechanical system, and he pushes go, and the thing pressurizes the whole building in like 5 minutes. But that is an anomaly. We've had that happen once, and usually there's a long process to pressurizing a building. Usually the facilities guys and the mechanical guys on site need to go around and close dampers and exhausts, and sometimes we're taping off exhausts, and so there can be a lot of coordination that goes into actually making sure the building is pressurized. And I don't think I mentioned it before, but the reason we pressurize, so you have thermal bridges, which are just essentially things like steel studs and cladding attachment systems that go completely through the insulation layer. And so that transmits heat from the interior to the exterior. The other side of it is air leakage. And the only way we can tell in thermography the difference between the two is by pressurization. If the temperatures change under pressure, you know that it's due to air leakage. If they don't, you know that it's just a thermal bridge. And so, the one example on this photo is here. So this is like a top of a window frame. And so, we were negatively pressurized or zero pressure. You go to positive pressure, and it's generally within the same temperature. But then you look up at, an area up here that had some vents, and you can tell that the temperature is changing between those two pressurizations. So. And then lastly, post-processing is really, I think we've shifted a lot of our work. So compared to handheld, we would be processing essentially in the field with the handheld camera. Whereas drones, we're now going out, we're taking a ton of images and then either dumping them onto a laptop while we're still at the building or coming them back to the office and processing them back at the office. So it's decreased the amount of time that it takes us to actually scan buildings, but the post-processing portion of it has kind of increased exponentially, mainly because we're taking, exponentially more photos too. Where we'd hand scan a building, maybe we have a couple hundred photos. You use a drone to map that same building or that roof area, and you may have over 1,000 photos. So, luckily Flare just came out with a program that lets you batch process everything. So that's awesome. But, up until that point, we were manually going in and adjusting each photo. And so generally for work product, this is what we end up with. We end up with kind of, reports with lots of photo pages that go around the building, and we compare areas to our digital scan and mark all the thermal anomalies on the scans. And then similarly with walls, we're usually doing kind of no pressure photos with pressure photos. And then just a quick kind of conclusions, and then we can open it up for questions. I think we'll have like 5-6 minutes left. So these are pretty broad conclusions, but are summary items. So the use of drone in building enclosures and in the construction industry, it's a very cost-effective tool for us as engineers to kind of determine whether or not buildings have issues in a pretty quick manner. There can be substantial upfront work, as Sean discussed. We have a lot of waivers. We're doing 99% of these thermal scans at night. So things like some airports actually shut down at night, so getting waivers close to airports isn't always an issue. But there's a lot of upfront work that goes into it that not a lot of people in our firm understand, and it's tough to get them to understand that. As Sean mentioned, a lot of people think that they can just go to him and say, we need to scan this building tonight, but that's not the case in a lot of places, especially in high urban areas. And then as far as thermography goes, or infrared thermography, we're using it almost solely now. We rarely have or even use the handheld camera, mainly because it's so much quicker and it provides a better worked product for everybody involved. And we still end up having to get on the roofs typically at night, but if you can imagine carrying a camera around, walking, looking at the camera and trying to take notes and things like that, it's just not generally a safe environment for people to be on a roof in the middle of the night with no lights. So being on the ground, operating the drone has just become a much better tool for us. And then as far as engineering judgment goes, again, there's several industry standards out there that provide good guidance for performing these tests. But generally, most of these scans require some sort of judgment, and you're either giving it to somebody after the fact to analyze your photos that you take, or if you're that person, you can analyze them yourself. But one of the big things is that verification's always necessary. Every single one of those ASTM standards essentially says, just because you see an anomaly in the IR camera doesn't mean you should report it as an anomaly. You should report it and recommend and require testing is done after the fact to actually confirm what you're seeing in the camera. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.